Chapter 31. The Monk. 2 men lay prone upon the ground. One bathed in blood and motionless, with his face toward the earth. This one was dead. The other leaned against a tree, supported there by the 2 valets, and was praying fervently, with clasped hands and eyes raised to heaven. He had received a ball in his thigh, which had broken the bone. The young men first approached the dead man. "He is a priest," said Bragelonne. "He has worn the tonsure. Oh, the scoundrels! To lift their hands against a minister of God." "Come here, sir," said Urban, an old soldier who had served under the Cardinal Duke in all his campaigns. "Come here, there is nothing to be done with him, whilst we may perhaps be able to save the other." The wounded man smiled sadly. "Save me? Oh no," said he. "But help me to die if you can." "Are you a priest?" asked Raoul. "No, sir. I ask, as your unfortunate companion appeared to me to belong to the church." "He is the curate of Bethune, sir, and was carrying the holy vessels belonging to his church, and the treasure of the chapter, to a safe place, the prince having abandoned our town yesterday. And as it was known that bands of the enemy were prowling about the country, no one dared to accompany the good man, so I offered to do so. And, sir," continued the wounded man, "I suffer much and would like, if possible, to be carried to some house." "Where you can be relieved?" asked de Guiche. "No, where I can confess." "But perhaps you are not so dangerously wounded as you think," said Raoul. "Sir," replied the wounded man, "believe me, there is no time to lose. The ball has broken the thigh bone and entered the intestines." "Are you a surgeon?" asked de Guiche. "No, but I know a little about wounds, and mine I know is mortal. Try, therefore, either to carry me to some place where I may see a priest or take the trouble to send one to me here. It is my soul that must be saved, as for my body it is lost. To die whilst doing a good deed, it is impossible. God will help you." "Gentlemen, in the name of heaven," said the wounded man, collecting all his forces, as if to get up, "let us not lose time in useless words. Either help me to gain the nearest village or swear to me on your salvation that you will send me the first monk, the first cure, the first priest you may meet. But," he added in a despairing tone, "perhaps no one will dare to come, for it is known that the Spaniards are ranging through the country, and I shall die without absolution. My God! My God! Good God! Good God!" added the wounded man, in an accent of terror which made the young men shudder. "You will not allow that? That would be too terrible." "Calm yourself, sir," replied de Guiche. "I swear to you, you shall receive the consolation that you ask. Only tell us where we shall find a house at which we can demand aid and a village from which we can fetch a priest." "Thank you, and God reward you. About half a mile from this, on the same road, there is an inn, and about a mile further on, after leaving the inn, you will reach the village of Greeny. There you must find the curate, or if he is not at home, go to the convent of the Augustines, which is the last house on the right, and bring me one of the brothers. Monk or priest, it matters not, provided only that he has received from Holy Church the power of absolving in articulo mortis." "Monsieur d'Armings," said de Guiche, "remain beside this unfortunate man and see that he is removed as gently as possible. The Vicomte and myself will go and find a priest." "Go, sir," replied the tutor. "But in heaven's name do not expose yourself to danger. Do not fear. Besides, we are safe for today. You know the axiom, non bis in idem." "Courage, sir," said Raoul to the wounded man. "We are going to execute your wishes." "May heaven prosper you," replied the dying man, with an accent of gratitude impossible to describe. The 2 young men galloped off in the direction mentioned, and in 10 minutes reached the inn. Raoul, without dismounting, called to the host and announced that a wounded man was about to be brought to his house and begged him in the meantime to prepare everything needful. He desired him also, should he know in the neighborhood any doctor or chirurgeon, to fetch him, taking on himself the payment of the messenger. The host, who saw 2 young noblemen, richly clad, promised everything they required, and our 2 cavaliers, after seeing that preparations for the reception were actually begun, started off again and proceeded rapidly toward Greeny. They had gone rather more than a league and had begun to descry the first houses of the village, the red-tiled roofs of which stood out from the green trees which surrounded them. When coming toward them mounted on a mule, they perceived a poor monk, whose large hat and grey worsted dress made them take him for an Augustine brother. Chance for once seemed to favor them in sending what they were so assiduously seeking. He was a man about 22 or 23 years old, but who appeared much older from ascetic exercises. His complexion was pale, not of that deadly pallor which is a kind of neutral beauty, but of a bilious yellow hue. His colorless hair was short and scarcely extended beyond the circle formed by the hat around his head, and his light blue eyes seemed destitute of any expression. "Sir," began Raoul with his usual politeness, "are you an ecclesiastic?" "Why do you ask me that?" replied the stranger, with a coolness which was barely civil. "Because we want to know," said de Guiche haughtily. The stranger touched his mule with his heel, and continued his way. In a second de Guiche had sprung before him and barred his passage. "Answer, sir," exclaimed he. "You have been asked politely, and every question is worth an answer. I suppose I am free to say or not to say who I am to two strangers who take a fancy to ask me." It was with difficulty that de Guiche restrained the intense desire he had of breaking the monk's bones. "In the first place," he said, making an effort to control himself, "we are not people who may be treated anyhow. My friend there is the Viscount of Bragelonne and I am the Count de Guiche. Nor was it from caprice we asked the question, for there is a wounded and dying man who demands the succor of the church. If you be a priest, I conjure you in the name of humanity to follow me to aid this man. If you be not, it is a different matter, and I warn you in the name of courtesy, of which you appear profoundly ignorant, that I shall chastise you for your insolence." The pale face of the monk became so livid and his smile so strange, that Raoul, whose eyes were still fixed upon him, felt as if this smile had struck to his heart like an insult. "He is some Spanish or Flemish spy," said he, putting his hand to his pistol. A glance, threatening and transient as lightning, replied to Raoul. "Well, sir," said de Guiche, "are you going to reply?" "I am a priest," said the young man. "Then, father," said Raoul, forcing himself to convey a respect by speech that did not come from his heart, "if you are a priest you have an opportunity, as my friend has told you, of exercising your vocation. At the next inn you will find a wounded man, now being attended by our servants, who has asked the assistance of a minister of God." "I will go," said the monk. And he touched his mule. "If you do not go, sir," said de Guiche, "remember that we have two steeds able to catch your mule and the power of having you seized wherever you may be. And then I swear your trial will be summary. One can always find a tree in a cord." The monk's eye again flashed, but that was all. He merely repeated his phrase, "I will go." And he went. "Let us follow him," said de Guiche. "It will be the surest plan." "I was about to propose so doing," answered de Bragelonne. In the space of 5 minutes the monk turned around to ascertain whether he was followed or not. "You see," said Raoul, "we have done wisely." "What a horrible face that monk has," said de Guiche. "Horrible," replied Raoul, "especially in expression." Yes, said de Guiche, "a strange face, but these monks are subject to such degrading practices. Their fasts make them pale, the blows of the discipline make them hypocrites, and their eyes become inflamed through weeping for the good things of this life we common folk enjoy, but they have lost." "Well," said Raoul, "the poor man will get his priest, but by heaven the penitent appears to me to have a better conscience than the confessor. I confess I am accustomed to priests of a very different appearance." "Ah," exclaimed de Guiche, "you must understand that this is one of those wandering brothers, who go begging on the high road until some day a benefice falls down from heaven on them. They are mostly foreigners, Scotch, Irish or Danish. I have seen them before." "As ugly?" "No, but reasonably hideous." "What a misfortune for the wounded man to die under the hands of such a friar." "Pshaw," said de Guiche, "absolution comes not from him who administers it, but from God. However, for my part, I would rather die unshriven than have anything to say to such a confessor. You are of my opinion, are you not, Viscount? And I see you playing with the pommel of your sword, as if you had a great inclination to break the Holy Father's head." "Yes, Count, it is a strange thing and one which might astonish you, but I feel an indescribable horror at the sight of yonder man. Have you ever seen a snake rise up on your path?" "Never," answered de Guiche. "Well, it has happened to me to do so in our Blaisois forests, and I remember that the first time I encountered one with its eyes fixed upon me, curled up, swinging its head and pointing its tongue, I remained fixed, pale and as though fascinated, until the moment when the Comte de la Fere. Your father? Asked de Guiche. No, my guardian, replied Raoul blushing. Very well. Until the moment when the Comte de la Fere, resumed Raoul, said, Come, Bragelonne, draw your sword. Then only I rushed upon the reptile and cut it in two, just at the moment when it was rising on its tail and hissing, ere it sprang upon me. Well, I vow I felt exactly the same sensation at sight of that man when he said, Why do you ask me that? And look so strangely at me. Then you regret that you did not cut your serpent in two morsels? Faith, yes, almost, said Raoul. They had now arrived within sight of the little inn, and could see on the opposite side the procession bearing the wounded man, and guided by Monsieur d'Armings. The youth spurred on. There is the wounded man, said de Guiche, passing close to the Augustine brother. Be good enough to hurry yourself a little, Monsieur Monk. As for Raoul, he avoided the monk by the whole width of the road and passed him, turning his head away in repulsion. The young men rode up to the wounded man to announce that they were followed by the priest. He raised himself to glance in the direction which they pointed out, saw the monk, and fell back upon the litter, his face illumined by joy. And now, said the youths, we have done all we can for you. And as we are in haste to rejoin the prince's army, we must continue our journey. You will excuse us, sir, but we are told that a battle is expected and we do not wish to arrive the day after it. Go, my young sirs, said the sick man, and may you both be blessed for your piety. You have done for me, as you promised, all that you could do. As for me, I can only repeat, may God protect you and all dear to you. Sir, said de Guiche to his tutor, we will precede you, and you can rejoin us on the road to Cambrin. The host was at his door and everything was prepared, bed, bandages and lint, and a groom had gone to Lens, the nearest village, for a doctor. Everything, said he to Raoul, shall be done as you desire, but you will not stop to have your wound dressed? Oh, my wound, mine, 'tis nothing, replied the Viscount. It will be time to think about it when we next halt. Only have the goodness, should you see a cavalier who makes inquiries about a young man on a chestnut horse followed by a servant, to tell him, in fact, that you have seen me, but that I have continued my journey and intend to dine at Mazingarbe and to stop at Cambrin. This cavalier is my attendant. Would it not be safer and more certain if I should ask him his name and tell him yours? Demanded the host. There is no harm in over-precaution. I am the Viscount de Bragelonne, and he is called Grimaud. At this moment the wounded man arrived from one direction, and the monk from the other, the latter dismounting from his mule, and desiring that it should be taken to the stables without being unharnessed. Sir Monk, said de Guiche, confess well that brave man, and be not concerned for your expenses or for those of your mule, all is paid. Thanks, monsieur, said the monk, with one of those smiles that made Bragelonne shudder. Come, Count, said Raoul, who seemed instinctively to dislike the vicinity of the Augustine. Come, I feel ill here, and the two young men spurred on. The litter, borne by two servants, now entered the house. The host and his wife were standing on the steps, whilst the unhappy man seemed to suffer dreadful pain, and yet to be concerned only to know if he was followed by the monk. At sight of this pale, bleeding man, the wife grasped her husband's arm. Well, what's the matter? Asked the latter. Are you going to be ill just now? No, but look, replied the hostess, pointing to the wounded man. I ask you if you recognize him? That man, wait a bit. Ah, I see you know him, exclaimed the wife. For you have become pale in your turn. Truly, cried the host, misfortune is coming on our house. It is the former executioner of Bethune. The former executioner of Bethune, murmured the young monk, shrinking back and showing on his countenance the feeling of repugnance which his penitent inspired. Monsieur d'Armings, who was at the door, perceived his hesitation. Sir Monk, said he, whether he is now or has been an executioner, this unfortunate being is none the less a man. Render to him, then, the last service he can by any possibility ask of you, and your work will be all the more meritorious. The monk made no reply, but silently wended his way to the room where the two valets had deposited the dying man on a bed. D'Arminges and Olivain and the two grooms then mounted their horses, and all four started off at a quick trot to rejoin Raoul and his companion. Just as the tutor and his escort disappeared in their turn, a new traveler stopped on the threshold of the inn. "What does your worship want?" demanded the host, pale and trembling from the discovery he had just made. The traveler made a sign as if he wished to drink, and then pointed to his horse and gesticulated like a man who is brushing something. "Ah, diable," said the host to himself. "This man seems dumb. And where will your worship drink?" "There," answered the traveler, pointing to the table. "I was mistaken," said the host. "He's not quite dumb. And what else does your worship wish for?" "To know if you have seen a young man pass, 15 years of age, mounted on a chestnut horse and followed by a groom? The Viscount de Bragelonne?" "Just so." "Then you are called Monsieur Grimaud?" The traveler made a sign of assent. "Well then," said the host, "your young master was here a quarter of an hour ago. He will dine at Mazingarbe and sleep at Cambrin." "How far is Mazingarbe?" 2 miles and a half. "Thank you." Grimaud was drinking his wine silently, and had just placed his glass on the table to be filled a second time, when a terrific scream resounded from the room occupied by the monk and the dying man. Grimaud sprang up. "What is that?" said he. "Whence comes that cry?" "From the wounded man's room," replied the host. "What wounded man?" "The former executioner of Bethune, who has just been brought in here, assassinated by Spaniards, and who is now being confessed by an Augustine friar." "The old executioner of Bethune," muttered Grimaud. "A man between 55 and 60, tall, strong, swarthy, black hair and beard?" "That is he, except that his beard has turned gray and his hair is white." "Do you know him?" asked the host. "I have seen him once," replied Grimaud, a cloud darkening his countenance at the picture so suddenly summoned to the bar of recollection. At this instant a second cry, less piercing than the first, but followed by prolonged groaning, was heard. The three listeners looked at one another in alarm. "We must see what it is," said Grimaud. "It sounds like the cry of one who is being murdered," murmured the host. "Mon Dieu," said the woman, crossing herself. If Grimaud was slow in speaking, we know that he was quick to act. He sprang to the door and shook it violently, but it was bolted on the other side. "Open the door," cried the host. "Open it instantly, Sir Monk." No reply. "Unfasten it, or I will break it in," said Grimaud. The same silence, and then, ere the host could oppose his design, Grimaud seized a pair of pincers he perceived in a corner and forced the bolt. The room was inundated with blood, dripping from the mattresses upon which lay the wounded man. Speechless, the monk had disappeared. "The monk!" cried the host. "Where is the monk?" Grimaud sprang toward an open window which looked into the courtyard. "He has escaped by this means," exclaimed he. "Do you think so?" said the host, bewildered. "Boy, see if the mule belonging to the monk is still in the stable." "There is no mule," cried he to whom this question was addressed. The host clasped his hands and looked around him suspiciously, whilst Grimaud knit his brows and approached the wounded man, whose worn, hard features awoke in his mind such awful recollections of the past. "There can be no longer any doubt but that it is himself," said he. "Does he still live?" inquired the innkeeper. Making no reply, Grimaud opened the poor man's jacket to feel if the heart beat, whilst the host approached in his turn. But in a moment they both fell back, the host uttering a cry of horror and Grimaud becoming pallid. The blade of a dagger was buried up to the hilt in the left side of the executioner. "Run! Run for help!" cried Grimaud, "and I will remain beside him here." The host quitted the room in agitation, and as for his wife, she had fled at the sound of her husband's cries. Chapter 32. The Absolution. This is what had taken place. We have seen that it was not of his own free will, but on the contrary, very reluctantly, that the monk attended the wounded man who had been recommended to him in so strange a manner. Perhaps he would have sought to escape by flight had he seen any possibility of doing so. He was restrained by the threats of the two gentlemen, and by the presence of their attendants, who doubtless had received their instructions. And besides, he considered it most expedient, without exhibiting too much ill will, to follow to the end his role as confessor. The monk entered the chamber, and approached the bed of the wounded man. The executioner searched his face with the quick glance peculiar to those who are about to die and have no time to lose. He made a movement of surprise and said, "Father, you are very young." "Men who bear my robe have no age," replied the monk dryly. "Alas, speak to me more gently, father. In my last moments I need a friend." "Do you suffer much?" asked the monk. "Yes, but in my soul much more than in my body." "We will save your soul," said the young man. "But are you really the executioner of Bethune, as these people say?" "That is to say," eagerly replied the wounded man, who doubtless feared that the name of executioner would take from him the last help that he could claim. "That is to say, I was but am no longer. It is 15 years since I gave up the office. I still assist at executions, but no longer strike the blow myself, no indeed." "You have, then, a repugnance to your profession?" "So long as I struck in the name of the law and of justice, my profession allowed me to sleep quietly, sheltered as I was by justice and law. But since that terrible night when I became an instrument of private vengeance, and when with personal hatred I raised the sword over one of God's creatures, since that day—" The executioner paused and shook his head with an expression of despair. "Tell me about it," said the monk, who, sitting on the foot of the bed, began to be interested in a story so strangely introduced. "Ah!" cried the dying man, with all the effusiveness of a grief declared after long suppression. "Ah! I have sought to stifle remorse by 20 years of good deeds. I have assuaged the natural ferocity of those who shed blood. On every occasion I have exposed my life to save those who were in danger, and I have preserved lives in exchange for that I took away. That is not all. The money gained in the exercise of my profession I have distributed to the poor. I have been assiduous in attending church, and those who formerly fled from me have become accustomed to seeing me. All have forgiven me, some have even loved me, but I think that God has not pardoned me, for the memory of that execution pursues me constantly, and every night I see that woman's ghost rising before me." "A woman? You have assassinated a woman, then?" cried the monk. "You also," exclaimed the executioner. "You use that word which sounds ever in my ears, assassinated." "I have assassinated, then, and not executed. I am an assassin, then, and not an officer of justice." And he closed his eyes with a groan. The monk doubtless feared that he would die without saying more, for he exclaimed eagerly, "Go on, I know nothing as yet. When you have finished your story, God and I will judge." "Oh, father," continued the executioner, without opening his eyes, as if he feared on opening them to see some frightful object, "it is especially when night comes on and when I have to cross a river, that this terror which I have been unable to conquer comes upon me. It then seems as if my hand grew heavy, as if the cutlass was still in its grasp, as if the water had the color of blood, and all the voices of nature, the whispering of the trees, the murmur of the wind, the lapping of the wave, united in a voice tearful, despairing, terrible, crying to me, 'Place for the justice of God.'" "Delirium," murmured the monk, shaking his head. The executioner opened his eyes, turned toward the young man, and grasped his arm. "Delirium," he repeated. "Delirium, do you say? Oh no, I remember too well. It was evening. I had thrown the body into the river, and those words which my remorse repeats to me are those which I in my pride pronounced. After being the instrument of human justice, I aspired to be that of the justice of God. But let me see, how was it done?" "Speak," said the monk. "It was at night. A man came to me and showed me an order, and I followed him. For other noblemen awaited me. They led me away masked. I reserved the right of refusing if the office they required of me should seem unjust. We traveled 5 or 6 leagues, serious, silent, and almost without speaking. At length, through the window of a little hut, they showed me a woman sitting, leaning on a table, and said, 'There is the person to be executed.'" "Horrible," said the monk. "And you obeyed?" "Father, that woman was a monster. It was said that she had poisoned her second husband. She had tried to assassinate her brother-in-law. She had just poisoned a young woman who was her rival, and before leaving England she had, it was believed, caused the favorite of the king to be murdered." "Buckingham!" cried the monk. "Yes, Buckingham." "The woman was English, then?" "No, she was French, but she had married in England." The monk turned pale, wiped his brow, and went and bolted the door. The executioner thought that he had abandoned him and fell back, groaning, upon his bed. "No, no, I am here," said the monk, quickly coming back to him. Go on, who were those men? One of them was a foreigner, English, I think. The 4 others were French and wore the uniform of musketeers. Their names? Asked the monk. I don't know them, but the 4 other noblemen called the Englishman my lord. Was the woman handsome? Young and beautiful? Oh yes, especially beautiful. I see her now, as on her knees at my feet, with her head thrown back, she begged for life. I have never understood how I could have laid low a head so beautiful, with a face so pale. The monk seemed agitated by a strange emotion. He trembled all over. He seemed eager to put a question which yet he dared not ask. At length, with a violent effort at self-control, the name of that woman, he said. I don't know what it was. As I have said, she was twice married, once in France, the second time in England. She was young, you say? 25 years old. Beautiful. Ravishingly. Blonde. Yes. Abundance of hair. Falling over her shoulders? Yes. Eyes of an admirable expression? When she chose. Oh yes, it is she. A voice of strange sweetness? How do you know it? The executioner raised himself on his elbow and gazed with a frightened air at the monk, who became livid. And you killed her, the monk exclaimed. You were the tool of those cowards who dared not kill her themselves? You had no pity for that youthfulness, that beauty, that weakness? You killed that woman. Alas! I have already told you, father, that woman under that angelic appearance had an infernal soul, and when I saw her, when I recalled all the evil she had done to me. To you? What could she have done to you? Come tell me. She had seduced and ruined my brother, a priest. She had fled with him from her convent. With your brother? Yes, my brother was her first lover, and she caused his death. Oh, father, do not look in that way at me. Oh, I am guilty then. You will not pardon me? The monk recovered his usual expression. Yes, yes, he said. I will pardon you if you tell me all. Oh, cried the executioner, all. Answer then. If she seduced your brother, you said she seduced him, did you not? Yes. If she caused his death, you said that she caused his death? Yes, repeated the executioner. Then you must know what her name was as a young girl. Oh mon Dieu, cried the executioner. I think I am dying. Absolution, father. Absolution. Tell me her name and I will give it. Her name was, my God, have pity on me, murmured the executioner, and he fell back on the bed, pale, trembling, and apparently about to die. Her name, repeated the monk, bending over him as if to tear from him the name if he would not utter it. Her name. Speak or no absolution. The dying man collected all his forces. The monk's eyes glittered. Endebile, murmured the wounded man. Endebile, cried the monk, standing up and lifting his hands to heaven. Endebile. You said Endebile, did you not? Yes, yes, that was her name, and now absolve me, for I am dying. I absolve you, cried the priest, with a laugh which made the dying man's hair stand on end. I absolve you? I am not a priest. You are not a priest, cried the executioner. What then are you? I am about to tell you, wretched man. Oh mon Dieu, I am John Francis de Winter. I do not know you, said the executioner. Wait, wait. You are going to know me. I am John Francis de Winter, he repeated. And that woman? Well, that woman was my mother. The executioner uttered the first cry, that terrible cry which had been first heard. Oh, pardon me, he murmured. If not in the name of God, at least in your own name. If not as priest, then as son. Pardon you, cried the pretended monk. Pardon you. Perhaps God will pardon you, but I never. For pity's sake, said the executioner, extending his arms. No pity for him who had no pity. Die impenitent, die in despair, die and be damned. And drawing a poniard from beneath his robe, he thrust it into the breast of the wounded man, saying, Here is my absolution. Then was heard that second cry, not so loud as the first and followed by a long groan. The executioner, who had lifted himself up, fell back upon his bed. As to the monk, without withdrawing the poniard from the wound, he ran to the window, opened it, leaped out into the flowers of a small garden, glided onward to the stable, took out his mule, went out by a back gate, ran to a neighboring thicket, threw off his monkish garb, took from his valise the complete habiliment of a cavalier, clothed himself in it, went on foot to the first post, secured there a horse and continued with a loose rein his journey to Paris. Chapter 33. Grimaud speaks. Grimaud was left alone with the executioner, who in a few moments opened his eyes. "Help, help," he murmured. "Oh God! Have I not a single friend in the world who will aid me either to live or to die?" "Take courage," said Grimaud. "They are gone to find assistance." "Who are you?" asked the wounded man, fixing his half-opened eyes on Grimaud. "An old acquaintance," replied Grimaud. "You?" And the wounded man sought to recall the features of the person now before him. "Under what circumstances did we meet?" he asked again. "One night, 20 years ago, my master fetched you from Bethune and conducted you to Armentières." "I know you well now," said the executioner. "You were one of the 4 grooms." "Just so." "Where do you come from now?" "I was passing by and drew up at this inn to rest my horse. They told me the executioner of Bethune was here and wounded, when you uttered 2 piercing cries. At the first we ran to the door, and at the second forced it open." "And the monk?" exclaimed the executioner. "Did you see the monk?" "What monk?" "The monk that was shut in with me." "No, he was no longer here. He appears to have fled by the window." "Was he the man that stabbed you?" "Yes," said the executioner. Grimaud moved as if to leave the room. "What are you going to do?" asked the wounded man. "He must be apprehended." "Do not attempt it. He has revenged himself and has done well. Now I may hope that God will forgive me, since my crime is expiated." "Explain yourself," said Grimaud. "The woman whom you and your masters commanded me to kill." "Milady." "Yes, milady. It is true you called her thus." "What has the monk to do with this milady?" "She was his mother." Grimaud trembled and stared at the dying man in a dull and leaden manner. "His mother," he repeated. "Yes, his mother." "But does he know this secret, then?" "I mistook him for a monk and revealed it to him in confession." "Unhappy man!" cried Grimaud, whose face was covered with sweat at the bare idea of the evil results such a revelation might cause. "Unhappy man, you named no one, I hope?" "I pronounced no name, for I knew none, except his mother's as a young girl. And it was by this name that he recognized her, but he knows that his uncle was among her judges." Thus speaking, he fell back exhausted. Grimaud, wishing to relieve him, advanced his hand toward the hilt of the dagger. "Touch me not," said the executioner. "If this dagger is withdrawn I shall die." Grimaud remained with his hand extended. Then striking his forehead he exclaimed, "Oh, if this man should ever discover the names of the others, my master is lost." "Haste, haste to him and warn him," cried the wounded man. "If he still lives, warn his friends too. My death, believe me, will not be the end of this atrocious misadventure." "Where was the monk going?" asked Grimaud. "Toward Paris." "Who stopped him?" "2 young gentlemen, who were on their way to join the army, and the name of one of whom I heard his companion mention. The Viscount de Bragelonne." "And it was this young man who brought the monk to you? Then it was the will of God that it should be so, and this it is which makes it all so awful," continued Grimaud. "And yet that woman deserved her fate. Do you not think so? On one's deathbed the crimes of others appear very small in comparison with one's own," said the executioner, and falling back exhausted he closed his eyes. Grimaud was reluctant to leave the man alone, and yet he perceived the necessity of starting at once to bear these tidings to the Comte de la Fère. Whilst he thus hesitated, the host re-entered the room, followed not only by a surgeon, but by many other persons, whom curiosity had attracted to the spot. The surgeon approached the dying man, who seemed to have fainted. "We must first extract the steel from the side," said he, shaking his head in a significant manner. The prophecy which the wounded man had just uttered recurred to Grimaud, who turned away his head. The weapon, as we have already stated, was plunged into the body to the hilt, and as the surgeon, taking it by the end, drew it forth, the wounded man opened his eyes and fixed them on him in a manner truly frightful. When at last the blade had been entirely withdrawn, a red froth issued from the mouth of the wounded man, and a stream of blood spouted afresh from the wound when he at length drew breath. Then, fixing his eyes upon Grimaud with a singular expression, the dying man uttered the last death rattle and expired. Then Grimaud, lifting the dagger from the pool of blood which was gliding along the room, to the horror of all present, made a sign to the host to follow him, paid him with a generosity worthy of his master, and again mounted his horse. Grimaud's first intention had been to return to Paris, but he remembered the anxiety which his prolonged absence might occasion Raoul, and reflecting that there were now only 2 miles between the Vicomte and himself, and a quarter of an hour's riding would unite them, and that the going, returning and explanation would not occupy an hour, he put spurs to his horse and a few minutes after had reached the only inn of Mazingarbe. Raoul was seated at table with the Count de Guiche and his tutor, when all at once the door opened and Grimaud presented himself, travel-stained, dirty, and sprinkled with the blood of the unhappy executioner. "Grimaud, my good Grimaud," exclaimed Raoul, "here you are at last. Excuse me, sirs, this is not a servant, but a friend. How did you leave the Count?" continued he. "Does he regret me a little? Have you seen him since I left him? Answer, for I have many things to tell you too. Indeed, the last 3 days some odd adventures have happened. But what is the matter? How pale you are! And blood too. What is this?" "It is the blood of the unfortunate man whom you left at the inn, and who died in my arms." "In your arms? That man. But know you who he was? He used to be the headsman of Bethune." "You knew him? And he is dead?" "Yes." "Well, sir," said d'Arminges, "it is the common lot. Even an executioner is not exempted. I had a bad opinion of him the moment I saw his wound, and since he asked for a monk, you know that it was his opinion, too, that death would follow." At the mention of the monk, Grimaud became pale. "Come, come," continued d'Arminges, "to dinner." For like most men of his age and generation, he did not allow sentiment or sensibility to interfere with a repast. "You are right, sir," said Raoul. "Come, Grimaud, order dinner for yourself, and when you have rested a little we can talk." "No, sir, no," said Grimaud. "I cannot stop a moment. I must start for Paris again immediately." "What? You start for Paris? You are mistaken. It is Olivain who leaves me. You are to remain." "On the contrary, Olivain is to stay and I am to go. I have come for nothing else but to tell you so." "But what is the meaning of this change?" "I cannot tell you." "Explain yourself." "I cannot explain myself." "Come, tell me, what is the joke?" "Monsieur le Vicomte knows that I never joke." "Yes, but I know also that Monsieur le Comte de la Fère arranged that you were to remain with me and that Olivain should return to Paris. I shall follow the Count's directions." "Not under present circumstances, monsieur. Perhaps you mean to disobey me?" "Yes, monsieur, I must." "You persist, then?" "Yes, I am going. May you be happy, monsieur." And Grimaud saluted and turned toward the door to go out. Raoul, angry and at the same time uneasy, ran after him and seized him by the arm. "Grimaud," he cried, "remain, I wish it." "Then," replied Grimaud, "you wish me to allow Monsieur le Comte to be killed?" He saluted and made a movement to depart. "Grimaud, my friend," said the Viscount, "will you leave me thus in such anxiety? Speak, speak, in heaven's name." And Raoul fell back trembling upon his chair. "I can tell you but one thing, sir, for the secret you wish to know is not my own. You met a monk, did you not?" "Yes." The young men looked at each other with an expression of fear. "You conducted him to the wounded man, and you had time to observe him, and perhaps you would know him again were you to meet him." "Yes, yes," cried both young men. "Very well. If ever you meet him again, wherever it may be, whether on the high road or in the street or in a church, anywhere that he or you may be, put your foot on his neck and crush him without pity, without mercy, as you would crush a viper or a scorpion. Destroy him utterly and quit him not until he is dead. The lives of 5 men are not safe, in my opinion, as long as he is on the earth." And without adding another word, Grimaud, profiting by the astonishment and terror into which he had thrown his auditors, rushed from the room. 2 minutes later the thunder of a horse's hoofs was heard upon the road. It was Grimaud, on his way to Paris. When once in the saddle, Grimaud reflected on 2 things. First, that at the pace he was going his horse would not carry him 10 miles, and secondly, that he had no money. But Grimaud's ingenuity was more prolific than his speech, and therefore at the first halt he sold his steed, and with the money obtained from the purchase took post horses. Chapter 34. On the eve of battle. Raoul was aroused from his somber reflections by his host, who rushed into the apartment crying out, "The Spaniards! The Spaniards!" That cry was of such importance as to overcome all preoccupation. The young men made inquiries and ascertained that the enemy was advancing by way of Hodin and Bethune, while Monsieur d'Armings gave orders for the horses to be made ready for departure. The two young men ascended to the upper windows of the house, and saw in the direction of Marsin and of Lens a large body of infantry and cavalry. This time it was not a wandering troop of partisans, it was an entire army. There was therefore nothing for them to do, but to follow the prudent advice of Monsieur d'Armings, and beat a retreat. They quickly went downstairs. Monsieur d'Armings was already mounted. Olivain had ready the horses of the young men, and the lackeys of the Count de Guiche guarded carefully between them the Spanish prisoner, mounted on a pony which had been bought for his use. As a further precaution they had bound his hands. The little company started off at a trot on the road to Cambrin, where they expected to find the prince. But he was no longer there, having withdrawn on the previous evening to La Bassée, misled by false intelligence of the enemy's movements. Deceived by this intelligence, he had concentrated his forces between Vieille-Chapelle and La Venthie, and after a reconnaissance along the entire line, in company with Marshal de Gramont, he had returned and seated himself before a table, with his officers around him. He questioned them as to the news they had each been charged to obtain, but nothing positive had been learned. The hostile army had disappeared 2 days before, and seemed to have gone out of existence. Now an enemy is never so near and consequently so threatening, as when he has completely disappeared. The prince was, therefore, contrary to his custom, gloomy and anxious, when an officer entered and announced to Marshal de Gramont that someone wished to see him. The Duc de Gramont received permission from the prince by a glance, and went out. The prince followed him with his eyes and continued looking at the door. No one ventured to speak, for fear of disturbing him. Suddenly a dull and heavy noise was heard. The prince leaped to his feet, extending his hand in the direction whence came the sound. There was no mistaking it, it was the noise of cannon. Everyone stood up. At that moment the door opened. "Monseigneur," said Marshal de Gramont with a radiant face, "will your highness permit my son, Count de Guiche, and his traveling companion, Viscount de Bragelonne, to come in and give news of the enemy, whom they have found while we were looking for him?" "What?" eagerly replied the prince. "Will I permit? I not only permit, I desire. Let them come in." The marshal introduced the two young men, and placed them face to face with the prince. "Speak, gentlemen," said the prince, saluting them. "First speak, we shall have time afterward for the usual compliments. The most urgent thing now is to learn where the enemy is and what he is doing." It fell naturally to the Count de Guiche to make reply. Not only was he the elder, but he had been presented to the prince by his father. Besides, he had long known the prince, whilst Raoul now saw him for the first time. He therefore narrated to the prince what they had seen from the inn at Mazingarbe. Meanwhile Raoul closely observed the young general, already made so famous by the battles of Rocroi, Fribourg, and Nordlingen. Louis de Bourbon, Prince de Condé, who since the death of his father, Henri de Bourbon, was called in accordance with the custom of that period, Monsieur le Prince, was a young man, not more than 26 or 27 years old, with the eye of an eagle, agli occhi grifoni as Dante says, aquiline nose, long waving hair, of medium height, well formed, possessed of all the qualities essential to the successful soldier, that is to say, the rapid glance, quick decision, fabulous courage. At the same time he was a man of elegant manners and strong mind, so that in addition to the revolution he had made in war, by his new contributions to its methods, he had also made a revolution at Paris, among the young noblemen of the court, whose natural chief he was and who, in distinction from the social leaders of the ancient court, modeled after Bassompierre, Bellegarde and the Duc d'Angoulême, were called the Petit Maîtres. At the first words of the Count de Guiche, the prince, having in mind the direction whence came the sound of cannon, had understood everything. The enemy was marching upon Lens, with the intention, doubtless, of securing possession of that town and separating from France the army of France. But in what force was the enemy? Was it a corps sent out to make a diversion? Was it an entire army? To this question de Guiche could not respond. Now, as these questions involved matters of gravest consequence, it was these to which the prince had especially desired an answer, exact, precise, positive. Raoul conquered the very natural feeling of timidity he experienced, and approaching the prince, "My lord," he said, "will you permit me to hazard a few words on that subject, which will perhaps relieve you of your uncertainty?" The prince turned and seemed to cover the young man with a single glance. He smiled on perceiving that he was a child hardly 15 years old. "Certainly, monsieur, speak," he said, softening his stern, accented tones, as if he were speaking to a woman. "My lord," said Raoul, blushing, "might examine the Spanish prisoner." "Have you a Spanish prisoner?" cried the prince. "Yes, my lord." "Ah, that is true," said de Guiche. "I had forgotten it." "That is easily understood. It was you who took him, Count," said Raoul, smiling. The old marshal turned toward the Viscount, grateful for that praise of his son, whilst the prince exclaimed, "The young man is right. Let the prisoner be brought in." Meanwhile the prince took de Guiche aside, and asked him how the prisoner had been taken and who this young man was. "Monsieur," said the prince, turning toward Raoul, "I know that you have a letter from my sister, Madame de Longueville, but I see that you have preferred commending yourself to me by giving me good counsel." "My lord," said Raoul, coloring up, "I did not wish to interrupt your highness in a conversation so important as that in which you were engaged with the count. But here is the letter." "Very well," said the prince. "Give it to me later. Here is the prisoner. Let us attend to what is most pressing." The prisoner was one of those military adventurers who sold their blood to whoever would buy, and grew old in stratagems and spoils. Since he had been taken he had not uttered a word, so that it was not known to what country he belonged. The prince looked at him with unspeakable distrust. "Of what country are you?" asked the prince. The prisoner muttered a few words in a foreign tongue. Ah. It seems that he is a Spaniard. Do you speak Spanish, Gramont?" "Faith, my lord, but indifferently." "And I not at all," said the prince, laughing. "Gentlemen," he said, turning to those who were near him, "can any one of you speak Spanish and serve me as interpreter?" "I can, my lord," said Raoul. "Ah, you speak Spanish? Enough, I think, to fulfill your highness's wishes on this occasion." Meanwhile the prisoner had remained impassive, and as if he had no understanding of what was taking place. "My lord asks of what country you are," said the young man, in the purest Castilian. "Ich bin ein Deutscher," replied the prisoner. "What in the devil does he say?" asked the prince. "What new gibberish is that?" "He says he is German, my lord," replied Raoul. "But I doubt it, for his accent is bad and his pronunciation defective." "Then you speak German also?" asked the prince. "Yes, my lord." "Well enough to question him in that language?" "Yes, my lord." "Question him, then." Raoul began the examination, but the result justified his opinion. The prisoner did not understand, or seemed not to understand, what Raoul said to him. And Raoul could hardly understand his replies, containing a mixture of Flemish and Alsatian. However, amidst all the prisoner's efforts to elude a systematic examination, Raoul had recognized his natural accent. "Non siete Spagnolo," he said. "Non siete Tedesco, siete Italiano." The prisoner started and bit his lips. "Ah, that," said the prince. "I understand that language thoroughly, and since he is Italian I will myself continue the examination." "Thank you, Viscount," continued the prince, laughing, "and I appoint you from this moment my interpreter." But the prisoner was not less unwilling to respond in Italian than in the other languages. His aim was to elude the examination. Therefore he knew nothing either of the enemy's numbers, or of those in command, or of the purpose of the army. "Very good," said the prince, understanding the reason of that ignorance. "The man was caught in the act of assassination and robbery. He might have purchased his life by speaking. He doesn't wish to speak. Take him out and shoot him." The prisoner turned pale. The two soldiers who had brought him in took him, each by one arm, and led him toward the door, whilst the prince, turning to Marshal de Gramont, seemed to have already forgotten the order he had given. When he reached the threshold of the door the prisoner stopped. The soldiers, who knew only their orders, attempted to force him along. "One moment," said the prisoner in French. I am ready to speak, my lord. Ah, said the prince, laughing. I thought we should come to that. I have a sure method of limbering tongues. Young men, take advantage of it against the time when you may be in command. But on condition, continued the prisoner, that your highness will swear that my life shall be safe. Upon my honor, said the prince. Question then, my lord. Where did the army cross the Lys? Between Saint Venant and Aire. By whom is it commanded? By Count de Funceldagne, General Beck and the Archduke. Of how many does it consist? 18,000 men and 36 cannon. And its aim is? Lens. You see, gentlemen, said the prince, turning with a triumphant air toward Marshal de Gramont and the other officers. Yes, my lord, said the marshal. You have divined all that was possible to human genius. Recall Duplessis, Belivre, Villequier and Durlac, said the prince. Recall all the troops that are on this side of the Lys. Let them hold themselves in readiness to march tonight. Tomorrow, according to all probability, we shall attack the enemy. But, my lord, said Marshal de Gramont, consider that when we have collected all our forces we shall have hardly 13,000 men. Monsieur le Maréchal, said the prince, with that wonderful glance that was peculiar to him, it is with small armies that great battles are won. Then turning toward the prisoner, take away that man, he said, and keep him carefully in sight. His life is dependent on the information he has given us. If it is true, he shall be free. If false, let him be shot. The prisoner was led away. Count de Guiche, said the prince, it is a long time since you saw your father. Remain here with him. Monsieur, he continued, addressing Raoul, if you are not too tired, follow me. To the end of the world, my lord, cried Raoul, feeling an unknown enthusiasm for that young general, who seemed to him so worthy of his renown. The prince smiled. He despised flatterers, but he appreciated enthusiasts. Come, monsieur, he said. You are good in counsel, as we have already discovered. Tomorrow we shall know if you are good in action. And I, said the marshal, what am I to do? Wait here to receive the troops. I shall either return for them myself, or shall send a courier directing you to bring them to me. 20 guards, well mounted, are all that I shall need for my escort. That is very few, said the marshal. It is enough, replied the prince. Have you a good horse, Monsieur de Bragelonne? My horse was killed this morning, my lord, and I am mounted provisionally on my lackeys. Choose for yourself in my stables the horse you like best. No false modesty. Take the best horse you can find. You will need it this evening, perhaps. You will certainly need it tomorrow. Raoul didn't wait to be told twice. He knew that with superiors, especially when those superiors are princes, the highest politeness is to obey without delay or argument. He went down to the stables, picked out a piebald Andalusian horse, saddled and bridled it himself, for Athos had advised him to trust no one with those important offices at a time of danger, and went to rejoin the prince, who at that moment mounted his horse. Now, monsieur, he said to Raoul, will you give me the letter you have brought? Raoul handed the letter to the prince. Keep near me, said the latter. The prince threw his bridle over the pommel of the saddle, as he was wont to do when he wished to have both hands free, unsealed the letter of Madame de Longueville, and started at a gallop on the road to Lens, attended by Raoul and his small escort, whilst messengers sent to recall the troops set out with a loose rein in other directions. The prince read as he hastened on. Monsieur, he said after a moment, they tell me great things of you. I have only to say, after the little that I have seen and heard, that I think even better of you than I have been told. Raoul bowed. Meanwhile, as the little troop drew nearer to Lens, the noise of the cannon sounded louder. The prince kept his gaze fixed in the direction of the sound with the steadfastness of a bird of prey. One would have said that his gaze could pierce the branches of trees which limited his horizon. From time to time his nostrils dilated as if eager for the smell of powder, and he panted like a horse. At length they heard the cannon so near that it was evident they were within a league of the field of battle, and at a turn of the road they perceived the little village of Aunay. The peasants were in great commotion. The report of Spanish cruelty had gone out, and every one was frightened. The women had already fled, taking refuge in Vitry. Only a few men remained. On seeing the prince they hastened to meet him. One of them recognized him. "Ah, my lord," he said, "have you come to drive away those rascal Spaniards and those Lorraine robbers?" "Yes," said the prince, "if you will serve me as guide." "Willingly, my lord. Where does your highness wish to go?" "To some elevated spot whence I can look down on Lens and the surrounding country." "In that case I'm your man. I can trust you. You are a true Frenchman?" "I am an old soldier of Rocroi, my lord." "Here," said the prince, handing him a purse. "Here is for Rocroi. Now, do you want a horse, or will you go afoot?" "Afoot, my lord. I have served always in the infantry. Besides, I expect to lead your highness into places where you will have to walk." "Come then," said the prince. "Let us lose no time." The peasant started off, running before the prince's horse. Then 100 steps from the village, he took a narrow road hidden at the bottom of the valley. For a half-league they proceeded thus, the cannon shot sounding so near that they expected at each discharge to hear the hum of the balls. At length they entered a path which, going out from the road, skirted the mountainside. The prince dismounted, ordered one of his aides and Raoul to follow his example, and directed the others to await his orders, keeping themselves meanwhile on the alert. He then began to ascend the path. In about 10 minutes they reached the ruins of an old chateau. Those ruins crowned the summit of a hill which overlooked the surrounding country. At a distance of hardly a quarter of a league they looked down on Lens, at bay, and before Lens the enemy's entire army. With a single glance the prince took in the extent of country that lay before him, from Lens as far as Vimy. In a moment the plan of the battle, which on the following day was to save France the second time from invasion, was unrolled in his mind. He took a pencil, tore a page from his tablets and wrote, "My dear Marshal, in an hour Lens will be in the enemy's possession. Come and rejoin me. Bring with you the whole army. I shall be at Vendin to place it in position. Tomorrow we shall retake Lens and beat the enemy." Then, turning toward Raoul, "Go, monsieur," he said. "Ride fast and give this letter to Monsieur de Gramont." Raoul bowed, took the letter, went hastily down the mountain, leaped on his horse and set out at a gallop. A quarter of an hour later he was with the marshal. A portion of the troops had already arrived, and the remainder was expected from moment to moment. Marshal de Gramont put himself at the head of all the available cavalry and infantry, and took the road to Vendin, leaving the Duc de Chatillon to await and bring on the rest. All the artillery was ready to move, and started off at a moment's notice. It was 7 o'clock in the evening when the marshal arrived at the appointed place. The prince awaited him there. As he had foreseen, Lens had fallen into the hands of the enemy immediately after Raoul's departure. The event was announced by the cessation of the firing. As the shadows of night deepened, the troops summoned by the prince arrived in successive detachments. Orders were given that no drum should be beaten, no trumpet sounded. At 9 o'clock the night had fully come. Still a last ray of twilight lighted the plain. The army marched silently, the prince at the head of the column. Presently the army came in sight of Lens. 2 or 3 houses were in flames and a dull noise was heard which indicated what suffering was endured by a town taken by assault. The prince assigned to everyone his post. Marshal de Gramont was to hold the extreme left, resting on Maricourt. The Duc de Chatillon commanded the center. Finally, the prince led the right wing, resting on Ani. The order of battle on the morrow was to be that of the positions taken in the evening. Each one, on awaking, would find himself on the field of battle. The movement was executed in silence and with precision. At 10 o'clock every one was in his appointed position. At 10:30 the prince visited the posts and gave his final orders for the following day. 3 things were especially urged upon the officers, who were to see that the soldiers observed them scrupulously. The first, that the different corps should so march that cavalry and infantry should be on the same line, and that each body should protect its gaps. The second, to go to the charge no faster than a walk. The third, to let the enemy fire first. The prince assigned the Count de Guiche to his father, and kept Bragelonne near his own person, but the 2 young men sought the privilege of passing the night together, and it was accorded them. A tent was erected for them near that of the marshal. Although the day had been fatiguing, neither of them was inclined to sleep. And besides, even for old soldiers the evening before a battle is a serious time. It was so with greater reason to 2 young men who were about to witness for the first time that terrible spectacle. On the evening before a battle, one thinks of 1,000 things forgotten till then. Those who are indifferent to one another become friends, and those who are friends become brothers. It need not be said that if in the depths of the heart there is a sentiment more tender, it reaches then, quite naturally, the highest exaltation of which it is capable. Some sentiment of this kind must have been cherished by each one of these two friends, for each of them almost immediately sat down by himself at an end of the tent, and began to write. The letters were long. The 4 pages were covered with closely written words. The writers sometimes looked up at each other and smiled. They understood without speaking. Their organizations were so delicate and sympathetic. The letters being finished, each put his own into 2 envelopes, so that no one, without tearing the first envelope, could discover to whom the second was addressed. Then they drew near to each other and smilingly exchanged their letters. "In case any evil should happen to me," said Bragelonne. "In case I should be killed," said de Guiche. They then embraced each other like 2 brothers, and each wrapping himself in his cloak they soon passed into that kindly sleep of youth which is the prerogative of birds, flowers and infants. Chapter 35. A dinner in the old style. The second interview between the former musketeers was not so formal and threatening as the first. Athos, with his superior understanding, wisely deemed that the supper table would be the most complete and satisfactory point of reunion, and at the moment when his friends, in deference to his deportment and sobriety, dared scarcely speak of some of their former good dinners, he was the first to propose that they should all assemble around some well-spread table, and abandon themselves unreservedly to their own natural character and manners, a freedom which had formerly contributed so much to that good understanding between them which gave them the name of the Inseparables. For different reasons this was an agreeable proposition to them all, and it was therefore agreed that each should leave a very exact address, and that upon the request of any of the associates a meeting should be convoked at a famous eating-house in the Rue de la Monnaie, of the sign of the Hermitage. The first rendezvous was fixed for the following Wednesday, at 8 o'clock in the evening precisely. On that day, in fact, the 4 friends arrived punctually at the hour, each from his own abode or occupation. Porthos had been trying a new horse, D'Artagnan was on guard at the Louvre, Aramis had been to visit one of his penitents in the neighborhood, and Athos, whose domicile was established in the Rue Guénégaud, found himself close at hand. They were, therefore, somewhat surprised to meet all together at the door of the Hermitage, Athos starting out from the Pont Neuf, Porthos by the Rue de la Roule, D'Artagnan by the Rue de Fosse Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois, and Aramis by the Rue de Béthesy. The first words exchanged between the 4 friends, on account of the ceremony which each of them mingled with their demonstration, were somewhat forced, and even the repast began with a kind of stiffness. Athos perceived this embarrassment, and by way of supplying an effectual remedy, called for 4 bottles of champagne. At this order, given in Athos's habitually calm manner, the face of the Gascon relaxed and Porthos's brow grew smooth. Aramis was astonished. He knew that Athos not only never drank, but more, that he had a kind of repugnance to wine. This astonishment was doubled when Aramis saw Athos fill a bumper, and toss it off with all his former enthusiasm. His companions followed his example. In a very few minutes the 4 bottles were empty, and this excellent specific succeeded in dissipating even the slightest cloud that might have rested on their spirits. Now the 4 friends began to speak loud, scarcely waiting till one had finished before another began, and each assumed his favorite attitude on or at the table. Soon, strange fact, Aramis undid 2 buttons of his doublet, seeing which, Porthos unfastened his entirely. Battles, long journeys, blows given and received, sufficed for the first themes of conversation, which turned upon the silent struggles sustained against him who was now called the Great Cardinal. "Faith," said Aramis, laughing, "we have praised the dead enough, let us revile the living a little. I should like to say something evil of Mazarin. Is it permissible?" Go on," replied D'Artagnan, laughing heartily. "Relate your story and I will applaud it if it is a good one." "A great prince," said Aramis, with whom Mazarin sought an alliance, was invited by him to send him a list of the conditions on which he would do him the honor to negotiate with him. The prince, who had a great repugnance to treat with such an ill-bred fellow, made out a list against the grain and sent it. In this list there were 3 conditions which displeased Mazarin. and he offered the prince 10,000 crowns to renounce them. Ah ha ha, laughed the three friends. Not a bad bargain, and there was no fear of being taken at his word. What did the prince do then? The prince immediately sent 50,000 francs to Mazarin, begging him never to write to him again, and offered 20,000 francs more, on condition that he would never speak to him. What did Mazarin do? Stormed, suggested Athos. Beat the messenger, cried Porthos. Accepted the money, said D'Artagnan. You have guessed it, answered Aramis, and they all laughed so heartily that the host appeared in order to inquire whether the gentlemen wanted anything. He thought they were fighting. At last their hilarity calmed down and, "Faith!" exclaimed D'Artagnan to the two friends. "You may well wish ill to Mazarin, for I assure you, on his side he wishes you no good." "Pooh! Really?" asked Athos. "If I thought the fellow knew me by my name I would be rebaptized, for fear it might be thought I knew him. He knows you better by your actions than your name. He is quite aware that there are two gentlemen who greatly aided the escape of Monsieur de Beaufort, and he has instigated an active search for them. I can answer for it." "By whom?" "By me, and this morning he sent for me to ask me if I had obtained any information." "And what did you reply?" "That I had none as yet, but that I was to dine today with two gentlemen, who would be able to give me some." "You told him that?" said Porthos, a broad smile spreading over his honest face. "Bravo! And you are not afraid of that, Athos?" "No," replied Athos. "It is not the search of Mazarin that I fear." "Now," said Aramis, "tell me a little what you do fear." "Nothing for the present, at least, nothing in good earnest." "And with regard to the past?" asked Porthos. "Oh, the past is another thing," said Athos, sighing. "The past and the future." "Are you afraid for your young Raoul?" asked Aramis. "Well," said D'Artagnan, "one is never killed in a first engagement." "Nor in the second," said Aramis. "Nor in the third," returned Porthos. "And even when one is killed, one rises again, the proof of which is, that here we are." "No," said Athos, "it is not Raoul about whom I am anxious, for I trust he will conduct himself like a gentleman. And if he is killed, well, he will die bravely, but hold, should such a misfortune happen, well." Athos passed his hand across his pale brow. "Well," asked Aramis. "Well, I shall look upon it as an expiation." "Ah," said D'Artagnan, "I know what you mean." "And I too," added Aramis. "But you must not think of that, Athos. What is past is past." "I don't understand," said Porthos. "The affair at Armentières," whispered D'Artagnan. "The affair at Armentières?" asked he again. "Milady." "Oh yes," said Porthos. "True, I had forgotten it." Athos looked at him intently. "You have forgotten it, Porthos?" said he. "Faith, yes, it is so long ago," answered Porthos. "This affair does not, then, weigh upon your conscience?" "Faith, no." "And you, D'Artagnan?" I own that when my mind returns to that terrible period I have no recollection of anything but the rigid corpse of poor Madame Bonancieux." Yes, yes," murmured he. "I have often felt regret for the victim, but never the very slightest remorse for the assassin." Athos shook his head doubtfully. "Consider," said Aramis. "If you admit divine justice and its participation in the things of this world, that woman was punished by the will of heaven. We were but the instruments, that is all." "But as to free will, Aramis? How acts the judge? He has a free will, yet he fearlessly condemns. What does the executioner? He is master of his arm, yet he strikes without remorse." "The executioner," muttered Athos, as if arrested by some recollection. "I know that it is terrible," said D'Artagnan. "But when I reflect that we have killed English, Rochellese, Spaniards, nay, even French, who never did us any other harm but to aim at and to miss us, whose only fault was to cross swords with us and to be unable to ward off our blows, I can, on my honor, find an excuse for my share in the murder of that woman." "As for me," said Porthos, "now that you have reminded me of it, Athos, I have the scene again before me, as if I now were there. Milady was there, as it were where you sit." Athos changed color. I was where D'Artagnan stands. I wore a long sword which cut like a Damascus. You remember it, Aramis, for you always called it Balizard. Well, I swear to you all three, that had the executioner of Bethune. Was he not of Bethune? Yes, egad. Of Bethune. Not been there, I would have cut off the head of that infamous being without thinking of it, or even after thinking of it. She was a most atrocious woman. And then, said Aramis, with the tone of philosophical indifference which he had assumed since he had belonged to the church, and in which there was more atheism than confidence in God, what is the use of thinking of it all? At the last hour we must confess this action, and God knows better than we can whether it is a crime, a fault, or a meritorious deed. I repent of it. Egad. No. Upon my honor and by the Holy Cross. I only regret it because she was a woman. The most satisfactory part of the matter, said D'Artagnan, is that there remains no trace of it. She had a son, observed Athos. Oh. Yes, I know that, said D'Artagnan, and you mentioned it to me, but who knows what has become of him? If the serpent be dead, why not its brood? Do you think his uncle de Winter would have brought up that young viper? De Winter probably condemned the son as he had done the mother. Then, said Athos, woe to de Winter, for the child had done no harm. May the devil take me if the child be not dead, said Porthos. There is so much fog in that detestable country, at least so D'Artagnan declares. Just as the quaint conclusion reached by Porthos was about to bring back hilarity to faces now more or less clouded, hasty footsteps were heard upon the stair, and someone knocked at the door. Come in, cried Athos. Please your honors, said the host. A person in a great hurry wishes to speak to one of you. To which of us? Asked all the four friends. To him who is called the Comte de la Fere. It is I, said Athos. And what is the name of the person? Grimaud. Ah, exclaimed Athos, turning pale. Back already. What can have happened, then, to Bragelonne? Let him enter, cried D'Artagnan. Let him come up. But Grimaud had already mounted the staircase and was waiting on the last step. So springing into the room he motioned the host to leave it. The door being closed, the four friends waited in expectation. Grimaud's agitation, his pallor, the sweat which covered his face, the dust which soiled his clothes, all indicated that he was the messenger of some important and terrible news. Your honors, said he, that woman had a child, that child has become a man. The tigress had a little one, the tiger has roused himself. He is ready to spring upon you, beware. Athos glanced around at his friends with a melancholy smile. Porthos turned to look at his sword, which was hanging on the wall. Aramis seized his knife. D'Artagnan arose. What do you mean, Grimaud? He exclaimed. That Milady's son has left England. That he is in France on his road to Paris, if he be not here already. The devil he is, said Porthos. Are you sure of it? Certain, replied Grimaud. This announcement was received in silence. Grimaud was so breathless, so exhausted, that he had fallen back upon a chair. Athos filled a beaker with champagne and gave it to him. Well, after all, said D'Artagnan, supposing that he lives, that he comes to Paris. We have seen many other such. Let him come. Yes, echoed Porthos, glancing affectionately at his sword, still hanging on the wall. We can wait for him, let him come. Moreover, he is but a child, said Aramis. Grimaud rose. A child, he exclaimed. Do you know what he has done, this child? Disguised as a monk, he discovered the whole history and confession from the executioner of Bethune, and having confessed him, after having learned everything from him, he gave him absolution by planting this dagger into his heart. See, it is on fire yet with his hot blood, for it is not 30 hours since it was drawn from the wound. And Grimaud threw the dagger on the table. D'Artagnan, Porthos and Aramis rose and in one spontaneous motion rushed to their swords. Athos alone remained seated, calm and thoughtful. And you say he is dressed as a monk, Grimaud? Yes, as an Augustine monk. What sized man is he? About my height, thin pale, with light blue eyes and tawny flaxen hair. And he did not see Raoul? Asked Athos. Yes, on the contrary, they met, and it was the Viscount himself who conducted him to the bed of the dying man. Athos, in his turn, rising without speaking, went and unhooked his sword. Hey, sir, said D'Artagnan, trying to laugh. Do you know we look very much like a flock of silly mouse-evading women? How is it that we, for men who have faced armies without blinking, begin to tremble at the mention of a child? It is true, said Athos, But this child comes in the name of heaven. And very soon they left the inn. Chapter 36. A letter from Charles I. The reader must now cross the Seine with us, and follow us to the door of the Carmelite convent in the Rue Saint-Jacques. It is 11 o'clock in the morning and the pious sisters have just finished saying Mass for the success of the armies of King Charles I. Leaving the church, a woman and a young girl dressed in black, the one as a widow and the other as an orphan, have re-entered their cell. The woman kneels on a prie-dieu of painted wood, and at a short distance from her stands the young girl, leaning against a chair, weeping. The woman must have once been handsome, but traces of sorrow have aged her. The young girl is lovely and her tears only embellish her. The lady appears to be about 40 years of age, the girl about 14. "Oh God," prayed the kneeling suppliant, "protect my husband, guard my son, and take my wretched life instead." "Oh God," murmured the girl, "leave me my mother." "Your mother can be of no use to you in this world, Henrietta," said the lady, turning around. "Your mother has no longer either throne or husband. She has neither son, money, nor friends. The whole world, my poor child, has abandoned your mother." And she fell back, weeping, into her daughter's arms. "Courage, take courage, my dear mother," said the girl. "Ah, 'tis an unfortunate year for kings," said the mother. "And no one thinks of us in this country, for each must think about his own affairs. As long as your brother was with me he kept me up, but he is gone and can no longer send us news of himself, either to me or to your father. I have pledged my last jewels, sold your clothes and my own to pay his servants, who refused to accompany him unless I made this sacrifice. We are now reduced to live at the expense of these daughters of heaven. We are the poor succored by God." "But why not address yourself to your sister, the Queen?" asked the girl. "Alas! The Queen, my sister, is no longer queen, my child. Another reigns in her name. One day you will be able to understand how all this is." "Well then, to the king, your nephew. Shall I speak to him? You know how much he loves me, my mother." "Alas! My nephew is not yet king, and you know Laporte has told us 20 times that he himself is in need of almost everything." "Then let us pray to heaven," said the girl. The two women who thus knelt in united prayer were the daughter and granddaughter of Henry IV, the wife and daughter of Charles I. They had just finished their double prayer, when a nun softly tapped at the door of the cell. "Enter, my sister," said the Queen. "I trust your Majesty will pardon this intrusion on her meditations, but a foreign lord has arrived from England and waits in the parlor, demanding the honor of presenting a letter to your Majesty." "Oh, a letter? A letter from the king, perhaps. News from your father. Do you hear, Henrietta? And the name of this lord?" "Lord de Winter." "Lord de Winter!" exclaimed the Queen. "The friend of my husband. Oh, bid him enter." And the Queen advanced to meet the messenger, whose hand she seized affectionately, whilst he knelt down and presented a letter to her, contained in a case of gold. "Ah, my lord," said the Queen, "you bring us 3 things which we have not seen for a long time: gold, a devoted friend, and a letter from the king, our husband and master." De Winter bowed again, unable to reply from excess of emotion. On their side the mother and daughter retired into the embrasure of a window to read eagerly the following letter. "Dear wife, we have now reached the moment of decision. I have concentrated here at Naseby camp all the resources heaven has left me, and I write to you in haste from thence. Here I await the army of my rebellious subjects. I am about to struggle for the last time with them. If victorious, I shall continue the struggle. If beaten, I am lost. I shall try in the latter case, alas. In our position, one must provide for everything. I shall try to gain the coast of France. But will they receive an unhappy king, who will bring such a sad story into a country already agitated by civil discord? Your wisdom and your affection must serve me as guides. The bearer of this letter will tell you, madam, what I dare not trust to pen and paper, and the risks of transit. He will explain to you the steps that I expect you to pursue. I charge him also with my blessing for my children, and with the sentiments of my soul for yourself, my dearest sweetheart." The letter bore the signature not of Charles King, but of Charles still king. "And let him be no longer king," cried the Queen. "Let him be conquered, exiled, proscribed, provided he still lives. Alas! In these days the throne is too dangerous a place for me to wish him to retain it. But my lord, tell me, she continued. Hide nothing from me. What is, in truth, the king's position? Is it as hopeless as he thinks? Alas, madam, more hopeless than he thinks. His Majesty has so good a heart that he cannot understand hatred, is so loyal that he does not suspect treason. England is torn in twain by a spirit of disturbance which, I greatly fear, blood alone can exorcise. But Lord Montrose, replied the Queen, I have heard of his great and rapid successes of battles gained. I heard it said that he was marching to the frontier to join the king. Yes, madam, but on the frontier he was met by Leslie. He had tried victory by means of superhuman undertakings. Now victory has abandoned him. Montrose, beaten at Philiphaugh, was obliged to disperse the remains of his army and to fly, disguised as a servant. He is at Bergen in Norway. Heaven preserve him, said the Queen. It is at least a consolation to know that some who have so often risked their lives for us are safe. And now, my lord, that I see how hopeless the position of the king is, tell me with what you are charged on the part of my royal husband. Well then, madam, said de Winter, the king wishes you to try and discover the dispositions of the king and queen toward him. Alas! You know that even now the king is but a child and the queen a woman weak enough. Here Monsieur Mazarin is everything. Does he desire to play the part in France that Cromwell plays in England? Oh no. He is a subtle, conscienceless Italian, who though he very likely dreams of crime, dares not commit it, and unlike Cromwell, who disposes of both houses, Mazarin has had the Queen to support him in his struggle with the Parliament. More reason then he should protect a king pursued by Parliament. The Queen shook her head despairingly. If I judge for myself, my lord, she said, the cardinal will do nothing, and will even, perhaps, act against us. The presence of my daughter and myself in France is already irksome to him. Much more so would be that of the king. My lord, added Henrietta, with a melancholy smile, it is sad and almost shameful to be obliged to say that we have passed the winter in the Louvre without money, without linen, almost without bread, and often not rising from bed because we wanted fire. Horrible, cried de Winter, the daughter of Henry IV, and the wife of King Charles. Wherefore did you not apply then, madam, to the first person you saw from us? Such is the hospitality shown to a queen by the minister from whom a king demands it. But I heard that a marriage between the Prince of Wales and Mademoiselle d'Orleans was spoken of, said de Winter. Yes, for an instant I hoped it was so. The young people felt a mutual esteem. But the Queen, who at first sanctioned their affection, changed her mind, and Monsieur, the Duc d'Orleans, who had encouraged the familiarity between them, has forbidden his daughter to think any more about the union. Oh, my lord, continued the Queen without restraining her tears, it is better to fight as the king has done, and to die, as perhaps he will, than live in beggary like me. Courage, madam, courage. Do not despair. The interests of the French crown, endangered at this moment, are to discountenance rebellion in a neighboring nation. Mazarin, as a statesman, will understand the politic necessity. Are you sure, said the Queen doubtfully, that you have not been forestalled? By whom? By the Joyces, the Prinns, the Cromwells? By a tailor, a coachmaker, a brewer? Ah! I hope, madam, that the cardinal will not enter into negotiations with such men. Ah! What is he himself? Asked Madame Henrietta. But for the honor of the king, of the Queen. Well, let us hope he will do something for the sake of their honor, said the Queen. A true friend's eloquence is so powerful, my lord, that you have reassured me. Give me your hand and let us go to the minister. And yet, she added, suppose he should refuse and that the king loses the battle. His Majesty will then take refuge in Holland, where I hear His Highness the Prince of Wales now is. And can His Majesty count upon many such subjects as yourself for his flight? Alas! No, madam, answered de Winter, but the case is provided for and I am come to France to seek allies. Allies, said the Queen, shaking her head. Madam, replied de Winter, provided I can find some of my good old friends of former times, I will answer for anything. Come then, my lord, said the Queen, with the painful doubt that is felt by those who have suffered much. Come, and may heaven hear you. Chapter 37. Cromwell's letter. At the very moment when the Queen quitted the convent to go to the Palais Royal, a young man dismounted at the gate of this royal abode, and announced to the guards that he had something of importance to communicate to Cardinal Mazarin. Although the cardinal was often tormented by fear, he was more often in need of counsel and information, and he was therefore sufficiently accessible. The true difficulty of being admitted was not to be found at the first door, and even the second was passed easily enough, but at the third watched, besides the guard and the doorkeepers, the faithful Bernouin, a Cerberus whom no speech could soften, no wand, even of gold, could charm. It was therefore at the third door that those who solicited or were bidden to an audience underwent their formal interrogatory. The young man, having left his horse tied to the gate in the court, mounted the great staircase and addressed the guard in the first chamber. "Cardinal Mazarin," said he. "Pass on," replied the guard. The cavalier entered the second hall, which was guarded by the musketeers and doorkeepers. "Have you a letter of audience?" asked a porter, advancing to the new arrival. "I have one, but not one from Cardinal Mazarin." "Enter, and ask for Monsieur Bernouin," said the porter, opening the door of the third room. Whether he only held his usual post, or whether it was by accident, Monsieur Bernouin was found standing behind the door, and must have heard all that had passed. "You seek me, sir," said he. "From whom may the letter be you bear to his eminence?" "From General Oliver Cromwell," said the newcomer. "Be so good as to mention this name to his eminence, and to bring me word whether he will receive me, yes or no." Saying which, he resumed the proud and somber bearing peculiar at that time to Puritans. Bernouin cast an inquisitorial glance at the person of the young man, and entered the cabinet of the cardinal, to whom he transmitted the messenger's words. "A man bringing a letter from Oliver Cromwell?" said Mazarin. "And what kind of a man?" "A genuine Englishman, your eminence. Hair sandy red, more red than sandy, grey-blue eyes, more grey than blue, and for the rest stiff and proud." "Let him give in his letter." "His eminence asks for the letter," said Bernouin, passing back into the antechamber. "His eminence cannot see the letter without the bearer of it," replied the young man. "But to convince you that I am really the bearer of a letter, see, here it is, and kindly add," continued he, "that I am not a simple messenger, but an envoy extraordinary." Bernouin re-entered the cabinet, returning in a few seconds. "Enter, sir," said he. The young man appeared on the threshold of the minister's closet, in one hand holding his hat, in the other the letter. Mazarin rose. "Have you, sir," asked he, "a letter accrediting you to me?" "There it is, my lord," said the young man. Mazarin took the letter and read it thus. "Mr. Mordaunt, one of my secretaries, will remit this letter of introduction to his eminence, the Cardinal Mazarin in Paris. He is also the bearer of a second confidential epistle for his eminence, Oliver Cromwell." "Very well, Monsieur Mordaunt," said Mazarin. "Give me this second letter and sit down." The young man drew from his pocket a second letter, presented it to the cardinal, and took his seat. The cardinal, however, did not unseal the letter at once, but continued to turn it again and again in his hand. Then, in accordance with his usual custom, and judging from experience that few people could hide anything from him when he began to question them, fixing his eyes upon them at the same time, he thus addressed the messenger. "You are very young, Monsieur Mordaunt, for this difficult task of ambassador, in which the oldest diplomatists often fail. My lord, I am 23 years of age, but your eminence is mistaken in saying that I am young. I am older than your eminence, although I possess not your wisdom. Years of suffering, in my opinion, count double, and I have suffered for 20 years. "Ah yes, I understand," said Mazarin. "Want of fortune, perhaps. You are poor, are you not?" Then he added to himself, "These English revolutionists are all beggars and ill-bred. My lord, I ought to have a fortune of 6 millions, but it has been taken from me." "You are not, then, a man of the people?" said Mazarin, astonished. "If I bore my proper title, I should be a lord. If I bore my name, you would have heard one of the most illustrious names of England." "What is your name, then?" asked Mazarin. "My name is Mordaunt," replied the young man, bowing. Mazarin now understood that Cromwell's envoy desired to retain his incognito. He was silent for an instant, and during that time he scanned the young man even more attentively than he had done at first. The messenger was unmoved. "Devil take these Puritans," said Mazarin aside. "They are carved from granite." Then he added aloud, "But you have relations left you?" "I have one remaining. 3 times I presented myself to ask his support, and 3 times he ordered his servants to turn me away." "Oh mon Dieu! My dear Mr. Mordaunt," said Mazarin, hoping by a display of affected pity to catch the young man in a snare. "How extremely your history interests me. You know not, then, anything of your birth. You have never seen your mother?" "Yes, my lord. She came 3 times, whilst I was a child, to my nurse's house. I remember the last time she came as well as if it were today." "You have a good memory," said Mazarin. "Oh, yes, my lord," said the young man, with such peculiar emphasis that the cardinal felt a shudder run through every vein. "And who brought you up?" he asked again. "A French nurse, who sent me away when I was 5 years old because no one paid her for me, telling me the name of a relation of whom she had heard my mother often speak. What became of you?" "As I was weeping and begging on the high road, a minister from Kingston took me in, instructed me in the Calvinistic faith, taught me all he knew himself, and aided me in my researches after my family." "And these researches?" "Were fruitless. Chance did everything." "You discovered what had become of your mother?" "I learned that she had been assassinated by my relation, aided by 4 friends, but I was already aware that I had been robbed of my wealth and degraded from my nobility by King Charles I. "Oh, I now understand why you are in the service of Cromwell. You hate the king." "Yes, my lord, I hate him," said the young man. Mazarin marked with surprise the diabolical expression with which the young man uttered these words. Just as, ordinarily, faces are colored by blood, his face seemed dyed by hatred and became livid. "Your history is a terrible one, Mr. Mordaunt, and touches me keenly, but happily for you, you serve an all-powerful master. He ought to aid you in your search. We have so many means of gaining information." "My lord, to a well-bred dog it is only necessary to show one end of a track. He is certain to reach the other." "But this relation you mentioned, do you wish me to speak to him?" said Mazarin, who was anxious to make a friend about Cromwell's person. "Thanks, my lord, I will speak to him myself. He will treat me better the next time I see him." "You have the means, then, of touching him?" "I have the means of making myself feared." Mazarin looked at the young man, but at the fire which shot from his glance he bent his head. Then, embarrassed how to continue such a conversation, he opened Cromwell's letter. The young man's eyes gradually resumed their dull and glassy appearance, and he fell into a profound reverie. After reading the first lines of the letter, Mazarin gave a side glance at him, to see if he was watching the expression of his face as he read. Observing his indifference, he shrugged his shoulders, saying, "Send on your business those who do theirs at the same time. Let us see what this letter contains. We here present the letter verbatim. To His Eminence, Monseigneur le Cardinal Mazarini. I have wished, Monseigneur, to learn your intentions relating to the existing state of affairs in England. The 2 kingdoms are so near that France must be interested in our situation, as we are interested in that of France. The English are almost of one mind in contending against the tyranny of Charles and his adherents. Placed by popular confidence at the head of that movement, I can appreciate better than any other its significance and its probable results. I am at present in the midst of war, and am about to deliver a decisive battle against King Charles. I shall gain it, for the hope of the nation and the Spirit of the Lord are with me. This battle won by me, the king will have no further resources in England or in Scotland. And if he is not captured or killed, he will endeavor to pass over into France to recruit soldiers, and to refurnish himself with arms and money. France has already received Queen Henrietta, and unintentionally, doubtless, has maintained a center of inextinguishable civil war in my country. But Madame Henrietta is a daughter of France, and was entitled to the hospitality of France. As to King Charles, the question must be viewed differently. In receiving and aiding him, France will censure the acts of the English nation, and thus so essentially harm England, and especially the well-being of the government, that such a proceeding will be equivalent to pronounced hostilities. At this moment Mazarin became very uneasy at the turn which the letter was taking and paused to glance under his eyes at the young man. The latter continued in thought. Mazarin resumed his reading. "It is important, therefore, Monseigneur, that I should be informed as to the intentions of France. The interests of that kingdom and those of England, though taking now diverse directions, are very nearly the same. England needs tranquility at home, in order to consummate the expulsion of her king. France needs tranquility to establish on solid foundations the throne of her young monarch. You need, as much as we do, that interior condition of repose which, thanks to the energy of our government, we are about to attain. Your quarrels with the Parliament, your noisy dissensions with the princes, who fight for you today and tomorrow will fight against you. The popular following directed by the coadjutor, President Blankmesnel, and Councillor Broussel, all that disorder, in short, which pervades the several departments of the state, must lead you to view with uneasiness the possibility of a foreign war. For in that event England, exalted by the enthusiasm of new ideas, will ally herself with Spain already, seeking that alliance. I have therefore believed, Monseigneur, knowing your prudence and your personal relation to the events of the present time, that you will choose to hold your forces concentrated in the interior of the French kingdom, and leave to her own the new government of England. That neutrality consists simply in excluding King Charles from the territory of France, and in refraining from helping him, a stranger to your country, with arms, with money, or with troops. My letter is private and confidential, and for that reason I send it to you by a man who shares my most intimate counsels. It anticipates, through a sentiment which your eminence will appreciate, measures to be taken after the events. Oliver Cromwell considered it more expedient to declare himself to a mind as intelligent as Mazarin's than to a queen admirable for firmness, without doubt, but too much guided by vain prejudices of birth and of divine right. Farewell, Monseigneur. Should I not receive a reply in the space of 15 days, I shall presume my letter will have miscarried. Oliver Cromwell. Mr. Mordaunt, said the cardinal, raising his voice, as if to arouse the dreamer, my reply to this letter will be more satisfactory to General Cromwell, if I am convinced that all are ignorant of my having given one. Go, therefore, and await it at Boulogne-sur-Mer, and promise me to set out tomorrow morning. I promise, my lord, replied Mordaunt. But how many days does your eminence expect me to await your reply? If you do not receive it in 10 days you can leave. Mordaunt bowed. That is not all, sir, continued Mazarin. Your private adventures have touched me to the quick. Besides, the letter from Mr. Cromwell makes you an important person as ambassador. Come, tell me, what can I do for you? Mordaunt reflected a moment and, after some hesitation, was about to speak, when Bernouin entered hastily and, bending down to the ear of the cardinal, whispered, My lord, the Queen Henrietta Maria, accompanied by an English noble, is entering the Palais Royal at this moment. Mazarin made a bound from his chair, which did not escape the attention of the young man, and suppressed the confidence he was about to make. Sir, said the cardinal, you have heard me? I fix on Boulogne because I presume that every town in France is indifferent to you. If you prefer another, name it, but you can easily conceive that, surrounded as I am by influences I can only muzzle by discretion, I desire your presence in Paris to be unknown. I go, sir, said Mordaunt, advancing a few steps to the door by which he had entered. No, not that way, I beg, sir, quickly exclaimed the cardinal. Be so good as to pass by yonder gallery, by which you can regain the hall. I do not wish you to be seen leaving. Our interview must be kept secret. Mordaunt followed Bernouin, who led him through the adjacent chamber, and left him with a doorkeeper, showing him the way out. Chapter 38. Henrietta Maria and Mazarin. The cardinal rose, and advanced in haste to receive the Queen of England. He showed the more respect to this queen, deprived of every mark of pomp and stripped of followers, as he felt some self-reproach for his own want of heart and his avarice. But supplicants for favor know how to accommodate the expression of their features, and the daughter of Henry IV smiled as she advanced to meet a man she hated and despised. Ah, said Mazarin to himself, what a sweet face, does she come to borrow money of me? And he threw an uneasy glance at his strong box. He even turned inside the bevel of the magnificent diamond ring, the brilliancy of which drew every eye upon his hand, which indeed was white and handsome. Your Eminence, said the august visitor, it was my first intention to speak of the matters that have brought me here to the Queen my sister, but I have reflected that political affairs are more especially the concern of men. Madam, said Mazarin, your Majesty overwhelms me with flattering distinction. He is very gracious, thought the queen. Can he have guessed my errand? Give, continued the cardinal, your commands to the most respectful of your servants. Alas, sir, replied the queen, I have lost the habit of commanding and have adopted instead that of making petitions. I am here to petition you. Too happy should my prayer be favorably heard. I am listening, madam, with the greatest interest, said Mazarin. Your Eminence, it concerns the war which the king, my husband, is now sustaining against his rebellious subjects. You are perhaps ignorant that they are fighting in England, added she, with a melancholy smile, and that in a short time they will fight in a much more decided fashion than they have done hitherto. I am completely ignorant of it, madam, said the cardinal, accompanying his words with a slight shrug of the shoulders. Alas, our own wars quite absorb the time and the mind of a poor, incapable, infirm old minister like me. Well then, your Eminence, said the queen, I must inform you that Charles I, my husband, is on the eve of a decisive engagement. In case of a check, Mazarin made a slight movement. One must foresee everything. In the case of a check, he desires to retire into France and to live here as a private individual. What do you say to this project? The cardinal had listened without permitting a single fiber of his face to betray what he felt, and his smile remained as it ever was, false and flattering. And when the queen finished speaking, he said, Do you think, madam, that France, agitated and disturbed as it is, would be a safe retreat for a dethroned king? How will the crown, which is scarce firmly set on the head of Louis XIV, support a double weight? The weight was not so heavy when I was in peril, interrupted the queen, with a sad smile. And I ask no more for my husband than has been done for me. You see that we are very humble monarchs, sir. Oh, you, madam, the cardinal hastened to say, in order to cut short the explanation he foresaw was coming. With regard to you, that is another thing. A daughter of Henry IV, of that great, that sublime sovereign. All which does not prevent you refusing hospitality to his son-in-law, sir. Nevertheless, you ought to remember that that great, that sublime monarch, when prescribed at one time, as my husband may be, demanded aid from England and England accorded it to him. And it is but just to say that Queen Elizabeth was not his niece. Peccato, said Mazarin, writhing beneath this simple eloquence. Your Majesty does not understand me. You judge my intentions wrongly, and that is partly because, doubtless, I explain myself in French. Speak Italian, sir. Ere the cardinal, your predecessor, sent our mother, Marie de Médicis, to die in exile, she taught us that language. If anything yet remains of that great, that sublime king, Henry, of whom you have just spoken, he would be much surprised at so little pity for his family being united to such a profound admiration of himself. The perspiration stood in large drops on Mazarin's brow. That admiration is, on the contrary, so great, so real, madam, returned Mazarin, without noticing the change of language offered to him by the queen, that if the king, Charles I, whom heaven protect from evil, came into France, I would offer him my house, my own house, but alas, it would be but an unsafe retreat. Some day the people will burn that house, as they burned that of the Maréchal d'Ancre, poor Concino Concini, and yet he but desired the good of the people. Yes, my lord, like yourself, said the queen ironically. Mazarin pretended not to understand the double meaning of his own sentence, but continued to compassionate the fate of Concino Concini. Well then, your Eminence, said the queen, becoming impatient. What is your answer? Madam, cried Mazarin, more and more moved, will your Majesty permit me to give you counsel? Speak, sir, replied the queen. The counsels of so prudent a man as yourself ought certainly to be available. Madam, believe me, the king ought to defend himself to the last. He has done so, sir, and this last battle, which he encounters with resources much inferior to those of the enemy, proves that he will not yield without a struggle. But in case he is beaten? Well, madam, in that case my advice, I know that I am very bold to offer advice to your Majesty. My advice is that the king should not leave his kingdom. Absent kings are very soon forgotten. If he passes over into France, his cause is lost. But, persisted the queen, if such be your advice and you have his interest at heart, send him help of men and money, for I can do nothing for him. I have sold even to my last diamond to aid him. If I had had a single ornament left, I should have bought wood this winter to make a fire for my daughter and myself." "Oh, madam," said Mazarin, "your majesty knows not what you ask. On the day when foreign succor follows in the train of a king to replace him on his throne, it is an avowal that he no longer possesses the help and love of his own subjects." "To the point, sir," said the queen. "To the point, and answer me yes or no. If the king persists in remaining in England, will you send him succor? If he comes to France, will you accord him hospitality? What do you intend to do? Speak." "Madam," said the cardinal, affecting an effusive frankness of speech, "I shall convince your majesty, I trust, of my devotion to you and my desire to terminate an affair which you have so much at heart, after which your majesty will, I think, no longer doubt my zeal in your behalf." The queen bit her lips and moved impatiently on her chair. "Well, what do you propose to do?" she said at length. "Come, speak." "I will go this instant and consult the queen, and we will refer the affair at once to Parliament, with which you are at war. Is it not so? You will charge Brussels to report it." "Enough, sir, enough. I understand you, or rather I am wrong. Go to the Parliament, for it was from this Parliament, the enemy of monarchs, that the daughter of the great, the sublime Henry IV, whom you so much admire, received the only relief this winter which prevented her from dying of hunger and cold." And with these words Henrietta rose in majestic indignation, whilst the cardinal, raising his hands clasped toward her, exclaimed, "Ah, madam, madam, how little you know me, mon Dieu!" But Queen Henrietta, without even turning toward him who made these hypocritical pretensions, crossed the cabinet, opened the door for herself, and passing through the midst of the cardinal's numerous guards, courtiers eager to pay homage, the luxurious show of a competing royalty, she went and took the hand of De Winter, who stood apart in isolation. Poor queen, already fallen, though all bowed before her, as etiquette required, she had now but a single arm on which she could lean. "It signifies little," said Mazarin, when he was alone. "It gave me pain and it was an ungracious part to play, but I have said nothing either to the one or to the other." Bernouin entered. "See if the young man with the black doublet and the short hair, who was with me just now, is still in the palace." Bernouin went out and soon returned with Comminges, who was on guard. "Your Eminence," said Comminges, "as I was reconducting the young man for whom you have asked, he approached the glass door of the gallery, and gazed intently upon some object, doubtless the picture by Raphael, which is opposite the door. He reflected for a second, and then descended the stairs. I believe I saw him mount a grey horse and leave the palace court. But is not your Eminence going to the Queen?" "For what purpose?" "Monsieur de Guitant, my uncle, has just told me that Her Majesty had received news of the army." "It is well, I will go." Comminges had seen rightly, and Mordaunt had really acted as he had related. In crossing the gallery parallel to the large glass gallery, he perceived De Winter, who was waiting until the Queen had finished her negotiation. At this sight the young man stopped short, not in admiration of Raphael's picture, but as if fascinated at the sight of some terrible object. His eyes dilated and a shudder ran through his body. One would have said that he longed to break through the wall of glass which separated him from his enemy. For if Comminges had seen with what an expression of hatred the eyes of this young man were fixed upon De Winter, he would not have doubted for an instant that the Englishman was his eternal foe. But he stopped, doubtless to reflect, for instead of allowing his first impulse, which had been to go straight to Lord De Winter, to carry him away, he leisurely descended the staircase, left the palace with his head down, mounted his horse, which he reined in at the corner of the Rue Richelieu, and with his eyes fixed on the gate, waited until the Queen's carriage had left the court. He had not long to wait, for the Queen scarcely remained a quarter of an hour with Mazarin, but this quarter of an hour of expectation appeared a century to him. At last the heavy machine, which was called a chariot in those days, came out, rumbling against the gates, and De Winter, still on horseback, bent again to the door to converse with Her Majesty. The horses started on a trot and took the road to the Louvre, which they entered. Before leaving the convent of the Carmelites, Henrietta had desired her daughter to attend her at the palace, which she had inhabited for a long time, and which she had only left because their poverty seemed to them more difficult to bear in gilded chambers. Mordaunt followed the carriage, and when he had watched it drive beneath the sombre arches, he went and stationed himself under a wall over which the shadow was extended, and remained motionless, amidst the mouldings of Jean Goujon, like a bas-relievo, representing an equestrian statue. Chapter 39. How sometimes the unhappy mistake chance for Providence. Well, madam, said de Winter, when the queen had dismissed her attendants. Well, my lord, what I foresaw has come to pass. What? Does the cardinal refuse to receive the king? France refuse hospitality to an unfortunate prince? Aye, but it is for the first time, madam. I did not say France, my lord. I said the cardinal, and the cardinal is not even a Frenchman. But did you see the queen? It is useless, replied Henrietta. The queen will not say yes when the cardinal says no. Are you not aware that this Italian directs everything, both indoors and out? And moreover, I should not be surprised had we been forestalled by Cromwell. He was embarrassed while speaking to me, and yet quite firm in his determination to refuse. Then did you not observe the agitation in the Palais Royal, the passing to and fro of busy people? Can they have received any news, my lord? Not from England, madam. I made such haste that I am certain of not having been forestalled. I set out 3 days ago, passing miraculously through the Puritan army, and I took post horses with my servant Tony. The horses upon which we were mounted were bought in Paris. Besides, the king, I am certain, awaits your majesty's reply before risking anything. You will tell him, my lord, resumed the queen despairingly, that I can do nothing, that I have suffered as much as himself, more than he has, obliged as I am to eat the bread of exile and to ask hospitality from false friends who smile at my tears. And as regards his royal person, he must sacrifice it generously and die like a king. I shall go and die by his side. Madam, madam, exclaimed de Winter, your majesty abandons yourself to despair, and yet perhaps there still remains some hope. No friends left, my lord. No other friends left in the wide world but yourself. O God! Exclaimed the poor queen, raising her eyes to heaven. Have you indeed taken back all the generous hearts that once existed in the world? I hope not, madam, replied de Winter thoughtfully. I once spoke to you of 4 men. What can be done with 4? 4 devoted, resolute men can do much, assure yourself, madam. And those of whom I speak performed great things at one time. And where are these 4 men? Ah, that is what I do not know. It is 20 years since I saw them, and yet whenever I have seen the king in danger I have thought of them. And these men were your friends? One of them held my life in his hands and gave it to me. I know not whether he is still my friend, but since that time I have remained his. And these men are in France, my lord? I believe so. Tell me their names. Perhaps I may have heard them mentioned and might be able to aid you in finding them. One of them was called the Chevalier d'Artagnan. Ah, my lord, if I mistake not, the Chevalier d'Artagnan is lieutenant of royal guards. But take care, for I fear that this man is entirely devoted to the cardinal. That would be a misfortune, said de Winter. And I shall begin to think that we are really doomed. But the others, said the queen, who clung to this last hope as a shipwrecked man clings to the hull of his vessel. The others, my lord. The second, I heard his name by chance, for before fighting us, these 4 gentlemen told us their names. The second was called the Comte de la Fere. As for the 2 others, I had so much the habit of calling them by nicknames that I have forgotten their real ones. Oh mon Dieu, it is a matter of the greatest urgency to find them out, said the queen, since you think these worthy gentlemen might be so useful to the king. Oh yes, said de Winter, for they are the same men. Listen, madam, and recall your remembrances. Have you never heard that Queen Anne of Austria was once saved from the greatest danger ever incurred by a queen? Yes, at the time of her relations with Monsieur de Buckingham. It had to do in some way with certain studs and diamonds. Well, it was that affair, madam. These men are the ones who saved her, and I smile with pity when I reflect that if the names of those gentlemen are unknown to you it is because the queen has forgotten them, who ought to have made them the first noblemen of the realm. Well then, my lord, they must be found, but what can 4 men or rather 3 men do, for I tell you, you must not count on Monsieur d'Artagnan. It will be 1 valiant sword the less, but there will remain still 3, without reckoning my own. Now 4 devoted men around the king to protect him from his enemies, to be at his side in battle, to aid him with counsel, to escort him in flight, are sufficient, not to make the king a conqueror, but to save him if conquered. And whatever Mazarin may say, once on the shores of France your royal husband may find as many retreats and asylums as the seabird finds in a storm. Seek then, my lord, seek these gentlemen, and if they will consent to go with you to England, I will give to each a duchy the day that we reascend the throne, besides as much gold as would pave Whitehall. Seek them, my lord, and find them, I conjure you. I will search for them, madam, said De Winter, and doubtless I shall find them, but time fails me. Has your majesty forgotten that the king expects your reply and awaits it in agony? Then indeed we are lost, cried the queen, in the fullness of a broken heart. At this moment the door opened and the young Henrietta appeared. Then the queen, with that wonderful strength which is the privilege of parents, repressed her tears and motioned to De Winter to change the subject. But that act of self-control, effective as it was, did not escape the eyes of the young princess. She stopped on the threshold, breathed a sigh, and addressing the queen, "Why then, do you always weep, mother, when I am away from you?" she said. The queen smiled, but instead of answering, "See, De Winter," she said, "I have at least gained one thing in being only half a queen, and that is that my children call me mother instead of madam." Then turning toward her daughter, "What do you want, Henrietta?" she demanded. "My mother," replied the young princess, "a cavalier has just entered the Louvre and wishes to present his respects to your majesty. He arrives from the army and has, he says, a letter to remit to you, on the part of the Marechal de Gramont, I think." "Ah," said the queen to De Winter, "he is one of my faithful adherents. But do you not observe, my dear lord, that we are so poorly served that it is left to my daughter to fill the office of doorkeeper?" "Madam, have pity on me," exclaimed De Winter. "You wring my heart." "And who is this cavalier, Henrietta?" asked the queen. "I saw him from the window, madam. He is a young man that appears scarce 16 years of age, and is called the Viscount de Bragelonne." The queen, smiling, made a sign with her head. The young princess opened the door and Raoul appeared on the threshold. Advancing a few steps toward the queen, he knelt down. "Madam," said he, "I bear to your majesty a letter from my friend the Count de Guiche, who told me he had the honor of being your servant. This letter contains important news and the expression of his respect." At the name of the Count de Guiche a blush spread over the cheeks of the young princess, and the queen glanced at her with some degree of severity. "You told me that the letter was from the Marechal de Gramont, Henrietta," said the queen. "I thought so, madam," stammered the young girl. "It is my fault, madam," said Raoul. "I did announce myself, in truth, as coming on the part of the Marechal de Gramont, but being wounded in the right arm he was unable to write, and therefore the Count de Guiche acted as his secretary." "There has been fighting, then?" asked the queen, motioning to Raoul to rise. "Yes, madam," said the young man. At this announcement of a battle having taken place, the princess opened her mouth as though to ask a question of interest, but her lips closed again without articulating a word, while the color gradually faded from her cheeks. The queen saw this, and doubtless her maternal heart translated the emotion, for addressing Raoul again. "And no evil has happened to the young Count de Guiche?" she asked. "For not only is he our servant, as you say, sir, but more, he is one of our friends." "No, madam," replied Raoul. "On the contrary, he gained great glory and had the honor of being embraced by His Highness, the Prince, on the field of battle." The young princess clapped her hands. And then, ashamed of having been betrayed into such a demonstration of joy, she half turned away and bent over a vase of roses, as if to inhale their odor. "Let us see," said the queen, "what the count says." And she opened the letter and read, "Madam, being unable to have the honor of writing to you myself, by reason of a wound I have received in my right hand, I have commanded my son, the Count de Guiche, who, with his father, is equally your humble servant, to write to tell you that we have just gained the Battle of Lens, and that this victory cannot fail to give great power to Cardinal Mazarin, and to the Queen over the affairs of Europe. If Her Majesty will have faith in my counsels, she ought to profit by this event to address at this moment, in favor of her august husband, the court of France. The Vicomte de Bragelonne, who will have the honor of remitting this letter to your majesty, is the friend of my son, who owes to him his life. He is a gentleman in whom your majesty may confide entirely, in case your majesty may have some verbal or written order to remit to me. I have the honor to be, with respect, etc., Marechal de Gramont. At the moment mention occurred of his having rendered a service to the count, Raoul could not help turning his glance toward the young princess, and then he saw in her eyes an expression of infinite gratitude to the young man. He no longer doubted that the daughter of King Charles I loved his friend. The Battle of Lens gained, said the queen. They are lucky here indeed, they can gain battles. Yes, the Marechal de Gramont is right. This will change the aspect of French affairs, but I much fear it will do nothing for English, even if it does not harm them. This is recent news, sir, continued she, and I thank you for having made such haste to bring it to me. Without this letter I should not have heard till tomorrow, perhaps after tomorrow, the last of all Paris. Madam, said Raoul, the Louvre is but the second palace this news has reached. It is as yet unknown to all, and I had sworn to the Count de Guiche to remit this letter to your majesty before even I should embrace my guardian. Your guardian? Is he too a Bragelonne? Asked Lord de Winter. I once knew a Bragelonne. Is he still alive? No, sir, he is dead, and I believe it is from him my guardian, whose near relation he was, inherited the estate from which I take my name. And your guardian, sir? Asked the queen, who could not help feeling some interest in the handsome young man before her. What is his name? The Comte de la Fere, madam, replied the young man, bowing. De Winter made a gesture of surprise, and the queen turned to him with a start of joy. The Comte de la Fere, she cried. Have you not mentioned that name to me? As for de Winter, he could scarcely believe that he had heard aright. The Comte de la Fere, he cried in his turn. Oh, sir, reply, I entreat you. Is not the Comte de la Fere a noble whom I remember, handsome and brave, a musketeer under Louis XIII, who must be now about 47 or 48 years of age? Yes, sir, you are right in every particular. And who served under an assumed name? Under the name of Athos. Latterly I heard his friend Monsieur d'Artagnan give him that name. That is it, madam, that is the same. God be praised. And he is in Paris? Continued he, addressing Raoul. Then turning to the queen. We may still hope. Providence has declared for us, since I have found this brave man again in so miraculous a manner. And sir, where does he reside, pray? The Comte de la Fere lodges in the Rue Guénégaud, Hôtel du Grand Roi Charlemagne. Thanks, sir. Inform this dear friend that he may remain within, that I shall go and see him immediately. Sir, I obey with pleasure, if Her Majesty will permit me to depart. Go, Monsieur de Bragelonne, said the queen, and rest assured of our affection. Raoul bent respectfully before the two princesses, and bowing to de Winter, departed. The queen and de Winter continued to converse for some time in low voices, in order that the young princess should not overhear them, but the precaution was needless. She was in deep converse with her own thoughts. Then, when de Winter rose to take leave, Listen, my lord, said the queen. I have preserved this diamond cross which came from my mother, and this order of St. Michael which came from my husband. They are worth about 50,000 pounds. I had sworn to die of hunger rather than part with these precious pledges, but now that this ornament may be useful to him or his defenders, everything must be sacrificed. Take them, and if you need money for your expedition, sell them fearlessly, my lord. But should you find the means of retaining them, remember, my lord, that I shall esteem you as having rendered the greatest service that a gentleman can render to a queen. And in the day of my prosperity, he who brings me this order, and this cross shall be blessed by me and my children. Madam, replied de Winter, your majesty will be served by a man devoted to you. I hasten to deposit these two objects in a safe place, nor should I accept them if the resources of our ancient fortune were left to us. But our estates are confiscated, our ready money is exhausted, and we are reduced to turn to service everything we possess. In an hour hence I shall be with the Comte de la Fere, and tomorrow your majesty shall have a definite reply. The queen tendered her hand to Lord de Winter, who, kissing it respectfully, went out and traversed alone and unconducted those large, dark and deserted apartments, brushing away tears which, blasé as he was by 50 years spent as a courtier, he could not withhold at the spectacle of royal distress so dignified, yet so intense. Chapter 40. Uncle and nephew. The horse and servant belonging to De Winter were waiting for him at the door. He proceeded toward his abode very thoughtfully, looking behind him from time to time to contemplate the dark and silent frontage of the Louvre. It was then that he saw a horseman, as it were, detach himself from the wall and follow him at a little distance. In leaving the Palais Royal he remembered to have observed a similar shadow. "Tony," he said, motioning to his groom to approach. "Here I am, my lord." "Did you remark that man who is following us?" "Yes, my lord." "Who is he?" "I do not know, only he has followed your grace from the Palais Royal, stopped at the Louvre to wait for you, and now leaves the Louvre with you." "Some spy of the cardinal," said De Winter to him aside. "Let us pretend not to notice that he is watching us." And spurring on he plunged into the labyrinth of streets which led to his hotel, situated near the Marais, for having for so long a time lived near the Place Royale. Lord de Winter naturally returned to lodge near his ancient dwelling. The unknown spurred his horse to a gallop. De Winter dismounted at his hotel, and went up into his apartment, intending to watch the spy, but as he was about to place his gloves and hat on a table, he saw reflected in a glass opposite to him a figure which stood on the threshold of the room. He turned around and Mordaunt stood before him. There was a moment of frozen silence between these two. "Sir," said De Winter, "I thought I had already made you aware that I am weary of this persecution. Withdraw then, or I shall call and have you turned out as you were in London. I am not your uncle, I know you not." "My uncle," replied Mordaunt, with his harsh and bantering tone. "You are mistaken. You will not have me turned out this time as you did in London, you dare not. As for denying that I am your nephew, you will think twice about it, now that I have learned some things of which I was ignorant a year ago." "And how does it concern me what you have learned?" said De Winter. "Oh, it concerns you very closely, my uncle, I am sure, and you will soon be of my opinion," added he, with a smile which sent a shudder through the veins of him he thus addressed. "When I presented myself before you for the first time in London, it was to ask you what had become of my fortune. The second time it was to demand who had sullied my name. And this time I come before you to ask a question far more terrible than any other, to say to you as God said to the first murderer, 'Cain, what hast thou done to thy brother Abel?' My lord, what have you done with your sister, who is my mother?" De Winter shrank back from the fire of those scorching eyes. "Your mother," he said. "Yes, my lord, my mother," replied the young man, advancing into the room until he was face to face with Lord de Winter, and crossing his arms. "I have asked the headsman of Bethune," he said, his voice hoarse and his face livid with passion and grief. "And the headsman of Bethune gave me a reply." De Winter fell back in a chair as though struck by a thunderbolt, and in vain attempted a reply. "Yes," continued the young man, "all is now explained. With this key I open the abyss. My mother inherited an estate from her husband. You have assassinated her. My name would have secured me the paternal estate. You have deprived me of it. You have despoiled me of my fortune. I am no longer astonished that you knew me not. I am not surprised that you refused to recognize me. When a man is a robber it is hard to call him nephew whom he has impoverished. When one is a murderer, to recognize the man whom one has made an orphan." These words produced a contrary effect to that which Mordaunt had anticipated. De Winter remembered the monster that Milady had been. He rose dignified and calm, restraining by the severity of his look the wild glance of the young man. "You desire to fathom this horrible secret?" said De Winter. "Well then, so be it. Know then, what manner of woman it was for whom today you call me to account. That woman had, in all probability, poisoned my brother, and in order to inherit from me she was about to assassinate me in my turn. I have proof of it. What say you to that?" "I say that she was my mother. She caused the unfortunate Duke of Buckingham to be stabbed by a man who was ere that honest, good and pure. What say you to that crime, of which I have the proof? She was my mother. On our return to France, she had a young woman who was attached to one of her opponents poisoned in the convent of the Augustines at Bethune. Will this crime persuade you of the justice of her punishment? For of all this I have the proofs." "She was my mother," cried the young man, who uttered these three successive exclamations with constantly increasing force. At last, charged with murders, with debauchery, hated by every one and yet threatening still, like a panther thirsting for blood, She fell under the blows of men whom she had rendered desperate, though they had never done her the least injury. She met with judges whom her hideous crimes had evoked. And that executioner you saw, that executioner who you say told you everything, that executioner, if he told you everything, told you that he leaped with joy in avenging on her his brother's shame and suicide. Depraved as a girl, adulterous as a wife, an unnatural sister, homicide, poisoner, execrated by all who knew her, by every nation that had been visited by her, she died accursed by heaven and earth. A sob which Mordaunt could not repress burst from his throat and his livid face became suffused with blood. He clenched his fists, sweat covered his face, his hair, like Hamlet's, stood on end, and racked with fury he cried out, "Silence, sir! She was my mother! Her crimes I know them not, her disorders I know them not, her vices I know them not. But this I know, that I had a mother, that 5 men leagued against one woman, murdered her clandestinely by night, silently like cowards. I know that you were one of them, my uncle, and that you cried louder than the others. She must die. Therefore I warn you, and listen well to my words, that they may be engraved upon your memory, never to be forgotten. This murder, which has robbed me of everything, this murder which has deprived me of my name, this murder, which has impoverished me, this murder, which has made me corrupt, wicked, implacable, I shall summon you to account for it first, and then those who were your accomplices, when I discover them." With hatred in his eyes, foaming at his mouth, and his fist extended, Mordaunt had advanced one more step, a threatening, terrible step, toward De Winter. The latter put his hand to his sword, and said with the smile of a man who for 30 years has jested with death, "Would you assassinate me, sir? Then I shall recognize you as my nephew, for you would be a worthy son of such a mother." "No," replied Mordaunt, forcing his features and the muscles of his body to resume their usual places and be calm. "No, I shall not kill you. At least not at this moment, for without you I could not discover the others. But when I have found them, then tremble, sir. I stabbed to the heart the headsman of Bethune, without mercy or pity, and he was the least guilty of you all." With these words the young man went out and descended the stairs with sufficient calmness to pass unobserved. Then upon the lowest landing place he passed Tony, leaning over the balustrade, waiting only for a call from his master to mount to his room. But De Winter did not call. Crushed, enfeebled, he remained standing and with listening ear. Then only when he had heard the step of the horse going away he fell back on a chair, saying, "My God, I thank thee that he knows me only."